Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show, and I'm glad that you can be with me on this. You could be anywhere this morning, and it just so happened, for whatever particular reason, that I found yourself here, and I appreciate you for being here. We have a damn good show for you today, a full show for you today, a jam-packed, bursting at the seams show for you today. We're going to have the one and only, the man himself, Scott Ritter. He is going to be on the show. Robert Fatima. He's a legal guy. He's going to get into some of the things that Donald Trump has been doing in regards to executive orders. The one and only Mark Frost. We are going to get into some of the economic news with Mark Frost, especially with Trump throwing around this idea of sanction this person and sanction that person. We're going to sanctions for you and sanctions for you. Okay, yeah, there are consequences for that. Sanctions are taxes. And I know they don't necessarily want to deal with that, being Republicans, but sanctions are taxes. There's that. Also, we have this bizarre, I don't know another word for it, ultimatum threat that Donald Trump is aiming at Vladimir Putin. It seems that Donald Trump has become so accustomed to dealing with weak people and weak countries and vassal states that when he's finally dealing with a peer that doesn't really care about his threats. And that's not entirely true. Putin cares about his threats, but he cares about his threats in a different way than, say, Greenland or, say, Denmark. Denmark is terrified that Trump would just take Greenland because Denmark knows that they can't do anything about it. Ultimately, the only thing they can do is prostrate themselves. How high do you need my ass to be, sir? That's the best that they can do. That's the most aggressive take that Denmark can take. Please, sir, how far does my ass need to be in the air? This high? That's the best Greenland can do. That's the best Denmark can do. If you're dealing with Europe and you say, hey, you need to give me more money for NATO, 5% now. I need you to do 5%. Well, you know that is going to fundamentally destroy their economies. And again, the best that they could say is, we need to cut our social programs because Donald Trump now wants 5%. This is not that. The concern that Russia has is this fool is going to end the world. Those are different concerns. I hope you understand. It's not, I'm afraid of the US. It's, I'm afraid of what you're going to create. I'm afraid of the situation that you're going to end us up in. You are going to end us up in a third world war. You are not accepting the reality of events the way the reality is presented on the ground. You have zero capability to do anything in this situation. Yes, you can escalate to a nuclear war, but then again, we're in a nuclear war. It's that. That's a different threat. That's a different concern. That was the same concern with Joe Biden or any American president for that matter. I'm not afraid of you that you could beat me on the battlefield. This is existential for us. So at the end of the day, we're going to do any and everything required to win this, even if we need to go to the border of Poland. If you F around and find out, then the entire world will be at stake. Those are different concerns. I hope you understand what I mean. One is weak. The other one is, oh God. It's that. Those are very different things. The concern of Russia is the latter. The concern of Europe is the former, because they're weak. There's also this other veiled threat, I don't know what else to call it, that was aimed at Joe Biden, where he pointed out that Joe Biden pardoned all of these people. And maybe Joe Biden should have pardoned himself. Now, the moment that you hear that, you're like, whoa, hell does that mean? Hell does that mean? Are they trying to throw Joe Biden in the cage? Is that what's happening? Is that what's happening? Now, again, Trump could just be talking because Trump talks a lot. But you would imagine that it is kind of true that Joe Biden pardoned all of his family members. And yet, the guy that maybe he should have pardoned was himself. I mean, he did a pardon for Hunter Biden going all the way back since the beginning of the Ukrainian conflict. And if I'm not mistaken, the pardon for Fauci also goes back to the beginning of the Ukrainian conflict. And you have to ask yourself, that's a hell of a long pardon. That's a hell of a long pardon. And why does it need to go back to the Ukraine conflict? Are these things somehow related to one another in regards to criminality in the Ukrainian conflict? Any way you look at it, it's dicey. That's all. Democrats at the point were saying, well, if you got to pardon somebody, it makes them look guilty. Yeah, it does. It does. I mean, I get the concern, right? Oh, Republicans are going to go on a witch hunt. Like, they went on a witch hunt against Trump, which is a bit rich, right? It's like, I'm going to call you what we are actually doing. And it's a way of inoculating ourselves for our own criminality. Fair enough. Frankly, this whole Biden influence peddling operation thing has been going on for decades. And if indeed they start looking into Ukraine, which they should, by the way, a functioning government would look into the Ukraine issue. They spent nearly $300 billion. Why wouldn't you look into this kind of grift when somebody's spending this much money to ensure that people weren't stealing that money? Because if you're spending $300 billion and you lose $1 billion, is anybody really going to notice? Will anybody notice $1 billion being lost when you're spending that much money, when you're throwing that much money out of helicopters? It's hard for me to believe that all of that money is going to be accounted for. And even further, it's hard for me to believe that somebody's hand is not in the cookie jar. And part of what Joe Biden may be doing with these pardons is trying to inoculate himself, his family, and anybody else that may have had their hand in the cookie jar as they've gone with this grift of this war. So yes, in any functioning government, you would be doing an accounting of the Ukrainian boondoggle, as I'm going to call it. Because again, it's a conflict that never needed to take place. And not just never needed to take place, has gotten all of these people killed to the tune of 1 million people. It is outrageous that they were able and willing to do this. And yet, here we are. And the man who said that he was going to be conciliatory, the man who decided to moderate his language on the issue, effectively saying, yes, expansion of NATO was always a red line. Now he's flipped his wig and he wants to play this, I'm going to be strong and then I'm going to negotiate. Okay, good luck with that. I don't know if I introduced the other guests. I think I jumped in the middle of it. Richard Solomon is going to be here. He is a libertarian socialist. He'll explain. He's been on the show once before. This was a long time ago. But we'll see what he is up to recently. And we have Daniel McAdams. Daniel McAdams is also going to go into some of the, let's say, executive orders that Donald Trump has been issuing. Because keep in mind, Donald Trump was sitting at a desk doing order after order after order after order. In one sense, it's interesting. I mean, how can I say this? Because I don't want to be misunderstood. I firmly think Trump, especially for my own political framing, is going to be doing some horrible stuff. And my expectation was for Trump to do horrible stuff. I had no expectation of Donald Trump doing good things in the office. So there's that. The only thing that I wanted of anything in the wars, meaning if you were going to make a promise to say, I'm going to end these wars and start them, then do that. End these wars. Don't start those wars. That is the thing that I was, okay, just do that. I rarely get anything out of presidents. And when a president says something that I actually like to hear, which in the context of these wars. So he is going to be doing a lot of horrible stuff. I just get your mind right. Like when you go into the doctor's office and you know they're going to get an IV. Or better yet, when you go to the doctor's office and you know the doctor's going to say, Mr. Thomas, I need you to pull your pants down and need to check your balls. Okay, you just got to accept that, right? You just got to go in knowing some really cringy stuff is about to take place. Just got to accept it. That's the way I feel about Trump. There's gonna be horrible things that take place. But that being said, there is something correct about a president coming into office with a clear vision of what they want. Like, it's not that I like the vision. The vision is going to be grotesque. But there is something good. And again, I don't want to be misunderstood. This is going to be grotesque. But the notion that the president has an idea, a vision of, I want to get in office and I want to do X, Y, and Z. And on the day I get in, I am going to be immediately on the job doing X, Y, and G, even when it's going to be completely and utterly grotesque. At the very least, he had a vision for it. That's not something I guess about Joe Biden, who comes across at this point like a placeholder and not even a good placeholder. So there is that. I'm going to get into the Russia stuff when Scott comes in because I don't want to repeat. But there is a fascinating clip. There is a fascinating clip of Donald Trump leaning into John Bolton. Now, obviously, Trump does not like John Bolton. And he has called him a warmonger. He's trashed him. He's called him stupid. He's called him everything but a child of God. But Bolton doesn't like Trump all that much either. So fair enough, right? But at one of the press conferences, Trump is asked about removing his security clearance from Bolton. In fact, he removed his security clearance from the 51 intelligence officials because, after all, those intelligence officials effectively lied, and they could try to do all of the, revisionist history of, well, we didn't really say it was Russian, it was a Russian laptop. We said whatever. You knew very clearly what you were trying to insinuate, that the laptop from Hunter Biden came from the Russians and was Russian disinformation. Don't lie after the fact and tell people, hey, I know when we showed you that spoon, it really wasn't a spoon. No, the spoon was actually a spoon in this case. And so Trump, in retaliation, which I actually approve, eliminated their security clearances. God bless them. I love it. It's trolling to nobody's business. And so all of these people were pissed off. So apparently John Bolton found out about this at like 3 a.m. or something. That he got the heads up that his security clearances had been removed. I think that's right. Wait a minute. I'm going to show the clip. Because Trump leans into him. Yeah. All right. So Bolton was they woke Bolton up at 12:01 a.m. January 21st, and Secret Service told them that Donald Trump had removed his security clearance and his protective detail would be leaving. I'll go back to that because I hear my guests. And I want to get to him. The one and only Scott Ritter. Scott Ritter is a former UN weapons inspector and weapons of mass destruction whistleblower. Scott, welcome back, man. How you doing? You doing all right?
I'm doing good, thank you. Yourself?
I am doing good. Better that you were with me. A little dragging ass this morning, but I'm all right. Just rough night. I want to get your take on something. So the man who got in office saying he was going to end the war in 24 hours, well, 24 hours has passed. The war is not ended, but fair enough. I never believed that in the first place, so let's put that to the side. Donald Trump, when he was given this kind of press conference, this was when he first got in, he was talking about NATO being a red line. It was always going to be a problem. And he gave people like me who was questioning whether or not Trump was going to actually work towards ending the war, whether he was going to actually do that. And I thought to myself, all right, good. He's framing his language in a way that allows a context to try to end this war. Because everybody else was saying nonsense. Putin wants to take 150,000 people and overthrow all of Europe. It's like, okay, this is stupid. So at the very least, by acknowledging NATO expansion was always a red line. Hell, even go back to Yeltsin, who was a patsy for Bill Clinton. Even for Yeltsin, it was a red line. And then Trump comes out with an ultimatum to Putin. And in this ultimatum, he says, I'm not looking to hurt Russia. I love the Russian people and always had a good relationship with President Putin. And this despite the radical left's Russia hoax. We must never forget that Russia helped us win the Second World War. Okay, first I want to stop there. Russia didn't help us win the Second World War. Russia lost like 30, 40 million people in that war in order to destroy Nazism. So to say, well, the U.S. who lost, what, 200,000, 300,000, whatever that number was, compared to the 40 million, it's just absurd, just obnoxious and absurd. But I'm sorry, let's keep going. It says, we must never forget that Russia helped us win the Second World War, losing almost 60 million lives in the process. All that being said, I'm going to do Russia, whose economy is failing, and President Putin a very big favor. Settle now and stop this ridiculous war. It's only going to get worse. If we don't make a deal, and soon, I have no other choice but to put high level of taxes, tariffs, and sanctions on anything being sold by Russia to the United States and various other participating countries. Let's get this war, which never should have started, if I were president, over with. We can do it the easy way or the hard way, and make it easy. It's always better. It's time to make a deal. No more lives should be lost. This is one of the most ludicrous and ridiculous statements that could ever come out of Trump's mouth. And Trump has said a lot of stupid stuff, and this has to be one of the dumbest. I want your take on this. Is this level of ultimatum going to work? And I want just your take in general on his tweet.
Well, it of course is a ridiculous tweet or post. I don't know what we call them nowadays, zeets or something. Whatever the term is for X. But let's also be honest. All this is it brings together things that Trump has been saying ever since it became clear, even before it became clear that he wasn't going to get it done in 24 hours and all this. Trump did say if Putin doesn't want to make a deal, then we're going to pour resources into Ukraine. He said that. He's always, that's always been, one of his options. His Secretary of Treasury nominee has said, Russia's economy isn't doing great, and we can crush it through sanctions. We can, there's more things we could do with the oil, and we can sanction India and China and the people that Russia sells oil to, and so there's things that we can do there. And then he has been, saying even before this ultimatum that Russia lost 1 million people, 1 million men, and
clip too.
Ukraine lost 700,000, but Russia lost 1 million, and it's just not going well for him. So, two things. One, the ignorance of Trump on anything dealing with Russia is manifest, and we know that Donald Trump's not a Russian expert, but surely as the president, he could surround himself with people who are knowledgeable about it. I mean, to give you an example, he made a decision to repost, segments from Jeffrey Sachs about Israel. But Jeffrey Sachs has also been speaking out quite eloquently and accurately about Russia. So we know that he has access to things. I don't expect him to follow me or listen to me, but if he had, he wouldn't say any of the stupidity that he just said. Again, I'm just going to say this just in case somebody's watching. Okay, I don't want credit. We can fix everything because what you're doing is stupid. And here comes the crux of it: the hard way. Well, there's going to be a hard way, Mr. President. The hard way is you're going to get your ass handed to you on a plate. All right, what you're talking about here is not going to work. Not only is it not going to work, the arrogance you're showing going in is going to get you in a trap of your own making. You see, Russia has been preparing for an idiot like you ever since the special military operation began. You don't have to be called Donald Trump. You don't have to be called Joe Biden. You're just an American idiot who knows nothing about Russia. See, we're a nation that has been, and he hints at it. This is what I don't understand. He talks about the Russia hoax. All right, if you're going to say that, I know why you said it, Mr. President, because you're stupid, and you basically have made this all about you. Oh, poor me. It was the Russia hoax. But why did the Russia hoax take place? Because of Russophobia. Do you know why this Democratic-controlled Congress was able to get away what they did for as long as they did? Because of the ignorance of the American people, of the American establishment, of the people that surround you about Russia. See, you don't know anything about Russia. You think you know Putin. You don't know Putin. I think maybe you do know a little bit about Putin, but you're not admitting it. Because I saw the photographs and the video of you coming out of the room with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki in 2000, what was it, 18.
Yeah.
And you were a beaten little puppy.
Yeah.
You weren't Donald Trump shouldering his way through a NATO crowd. You're a beaten little puppy, bowed down. I've been reading people for a long time, Mr. President. You were a beaten little puppy because Vladimir Putin just wasn't playing your game. And Vladimir Putin, and if you saw Putin walk out, shoulders back, he came up, he controlled that podium because Putin is confident. Putin is everything you're not. Putin is smart. Putin is clever. He's well informed, and he has a plan and a strategy. If you want to do this the hard way, you're going to find that your economy is going to collapse. What are you going to do? You're going to sanction. You're talking about sanctioning the world. You're going to tariff the world. You're clearly not an economist. I'm not saying that you can't have tariffs, and I'm not saying there isn't a role for tariffs in your economic strategy, etc. But to come out and say that you're just going to blanket tariff everything, well, where are you going to get your uranium from? It begins with a Uranium. Look it up, Mr. President. It's what's used to make the fuel that goes in nuclear reactors. Somebody will explain what a nuclear reactor is to you at some point in time, but it makes energy so the lights come on in your house and other people's houses too. Where are you going to get that, Mr. President, if you sanction the hell out of it from Russia? Because Russia right now is the only source of uranium you got. And we can go on and on. I mean, you want to build airplanes? We're going to have huge American airplanes. It's beautiful. The American industry is going to be so huge and wonderful. You know, airplanes use this thing called titanium. Where are you going to get your titanium, Mr. President? And we can go do this all day long. Let me throw another one at you. Where are you going to get your oil? We're self-sufficient. I'd take another look at that, Mr. President, because you're not as self-sufficient as you think. And, you know, there's a little game going on right now where, you know, we don't buy Russian oil unless it goes through India, and then we buy it. We have no choice but to buy it because our refineries, again, it's where they take the raw oil, Mr. President, and they break it down and they make different products. Our refineries down in the Gulf Coast, they're geared to use this high sulfuric content oil that comes out of Venezuela. And we don't buy that anymore because you sanctioned them. It's not just your fault. We've been doing it for a while. But when you, Mr. President, you remember this one, don't you, Mr. President, when you shut it down, what did you do? You bought Russian oil. Why? Because the Russians have a version of Ural crude that is about the same mixture that we can run through our refineries without spending billions of dollars to fix the refineries up. But then when we shut down and said we're not buying it direct, we didn't have any oil to put into our refineries. Oh, no, Mr. President. So what did we do? We bought it from India. Or we were doing stupid tricks like having tankers come out and cross-loading it to come in and pretend that it wasn't from Russia. Mr. President, your advisors are idiots. They're wrong. 60 million, where'd you get that number, Mr. President? Let's just start with that. Because if you can't get a basic number right about how many people the Soviet Union lost in World War II, then we know you're wrong about everything. It was about 27 million, Mr. President. That's the number that the Russians have embraced. And I'm not going to challenge the Russians on how many people they lost in the conflict, but they didn't lose 60 million. They lost a lot. And as you said, Jaramal, you know, the Russians sort of beat the Germans. They did, 60, 70% of the heavy lifting for taking down Nazi Germany. So, man, it just, we can go on and on. Russia's not losing the war, Mr. President. Keith Kellogg may be a brave guy. I'm not ever going to denigrate his courage because in Vietnam, he won a Silver Star for running out under heavy enemy fire to rescue his wounded men. And he deserves to wear that medal, and we deserve to shake his hand and buy him a beer when we beat him in a bar. Okay, but Keith Kellogg doesn't know anything about Russia. Nothing, zero, squat. He is repeating verbatim propaganda that's being spewed out by Ukraine. And we know it because of his casualty figures. 1 million with 700,000. He doesn't know anything. He's advising you on something he knows nothing about. If you want to know the casualties that Russia has lost, Mr. President, first of all, if you know Putin so well, call him up. Hey, how you been, guys? You losing? He's not going to tell you, but I'll tell you, Mr. President, because, see, unlike Kellogg, I am a Russian expert. So I would say that the Russians have lost around 90,000 dead from the Ministry of Defense resources. On top of that, we can throw in another 30 or so thousand, 40,000 from the Donbass people's militias before they were absorbed by the Russians. Wagner lost another 10, 20, 30,000 guys. You have non-Ministry of Defense resources. So I think the overall death count, Mr. President, is up around 150, 160,000 Russian dead. Now, that's a lot, Mr. President, a whole bunch. I want you to chew on that number for a minute, Mr. President, because in 10 years in Vietnam, we lost 58. The war you avoided, Mr. President, we don't want to talk about that. 58,000 dead in 10 years. It nearly broke our nation. Okay, Russia has a population that's roughly half ours, and they've lost 150, 160,000 dead in 3 years. You don't see them whimpering or whining, do you, Mr. President? Russians aren't sitting there crying in their pretzels. They're crying. They go to funerals. But have you seen the Russian mothers come out and make statements, Mr. President? Don't make my son's sacrifice in vain. Win this war, Mr. President. They're talking about the real president, President Putin. There's no backing down here. Now, when we talk about mobilization potential, the Russians right now have about another 1 million men that they could rapidly mobilize without detrimentally impacting the workforce for their. So they have almost an infinite growth potential, whereas the Ukrainians, they, on the other hand, have suffered between 700 and 1.1 million dead, Mr. President. All right. So whoever's talking to you has their numbers wrong. They're throwing you out Ukrainian propaganda, and they've got, ask somebody, not Keith Kellogg, ask anybody but Keith Kellogg, what a war of attrition is, Mr. President. And you'll see that Russia is doing very well in this war of attrition. And it's not just about grinding down the numbers of Ukrainian soldiers. This is, I think, the fourth iteration of the Ukrainian army being destroyed and rebuilt by NATO at great expense, but also the material. I notice you're not talking about pouring equipment in there because maybe somebody's briefed you on the reality. We ain't got nothing left to send them. All right? There ain't nothing there. What are you going to send them? Nothing. The Russian military, rather than being weaker, is about 3.5, 4 times stronger today than it was when it started the special military operation. And it is extraordinarily combat experienced. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not more than 1 million men who have firsthand experience in high-intensity modern warfare. How many American soldiers have experience in high-intensity modern warfare? I'll give you a quick pro hint. 0. Okay, we had no experience in this. We don't do it anymore. We don't even train for it. We're barely starting to get back into the training business, but training in the real thing ain't quite the same, Mr. President. The bottom line is you've got it all wrong on Russia, 100% wrong on Russia, and you're setting yourself up for failure. And this will be not only a major policy failure now, but here's the thing, and I'm going to conclude with this because this is the one that nobody's telling you about, Mr. President. You say you want to avoid a nuclear war, and I believe you. I believe you do, because I think you do understand what the consequences of a nuclear conflict will be. Yeah. Fatal for everybody, including you and your family. Everybody will be dead. You get it. I know you do. The hard way. Are you talking about the strategic defeat of Russia? Because you know that is the current policy of the United States. You inherited that policy. The strategic defeat of Russia. Russia cannot be strategically defeated. Even if all the things you thought you could do could be done, and they can't. You put Russia's butt in a sling, put their back against the wall, and now we are talking about a nuclear war, the one you claim you don't want to avoid, you don't want to have occur. But that's not the problem. Let's think really big now, Mr. President. Vladimir Putin, he's in his 70s. He just won an election. He's going to govern for now, coming up on 5 more years. Then he could probably run for election one more time, 6 more years. It's Marine math. I'm not saying I'm the best mathematician in the world, but when you're a 70-year-old guy and you're adding on 11 years, he's in his 80s. That's it. Vladimir Putin may be healthy. He may be coherent. He may be everything that Joe Biden isn't. But when you get to be 80 years old, you're done. In fact, you should be done in your 70s, Mr. President. Yeah. That's okay. We'll give you a pass on this one. But ask yourself, Mr. President, who's going to replace Vladimir Putin? That's the $1 million question. And that should be weighing on your mind. Because let me tell you this right now. If you want to peacefully coexist with Russia,
Putin's moderate.
You've got to find somebody to replace. And it's not you finding someone to replace Putin. You need to allow Russia to find somebody to replace Putin. Ask your people about what happened in the 90s, 93, 94, when we were trying to work with Russia to build democratic institutions. In fact, read the memorandum that this was declassified at the National Security Archive, written by the Charge d'Affaires at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow in 1994. Mary, I think was his name, about the role played by the United States in destroying Russia's ability to build democratic institutions. See, it isn't Vladimir Putin that destroyed democracy in Russia. It's the United States that destroyed democracy in Russia. And we did it on purpose. We did it to economically dominate Russia, to politically dominate Russia. And then when Vladimir Putin came in and inherited the mess that we made, the destruction that destroyed Russia, as he sought to build these institutions, the CIA took advantage and turned every single potential opposition political party that could be going. And Putin said, I want an opposition. Democracy requires an opposition. But it's not an opposition when the enemy, that's us, Mr. President, buys them. When the CIA goes in and buys the opposition and uses the opposition not to create a adversarial democratic relationship like it exists between the Democrats and the Republicans here today in America. That's healthy. Have two sides going at each other. Putin was all in favor of that. But it doesn't work when the one side is being funded by the CIA not to create a healthier Russia, but to bring down Putin's regime. You see, we've been trying to bring down Vladimir Putin for 25 years, Mr. President. Hasn't worked. He's stronger today than he's ever been. The economy of Russia is stronger today than it's ever been. And that's because of Vladimir Putin. But Putin isn't immortal. I just did an event with a guy named Dmitry Trenin. And he's old-time Soviet hand, Russian hand, and he has the ear of Vladimir Putin. And he said that in the 2030s are going to be a very dangerous time for Russia and the world. Because when Vladimir Putin steps aside, and he has to, the human body can't last forever, even if your name is Putin. If they don't have somebody to replace him, Russia is going to go into a period of deep political crisis. That will make them feel very vulnerable. And if you start something today, the hard way, you're not going to beat Russia. But what's going to happen is in the 2030s, a decade from now, remember, Mr. President, time flies fast. It was just, like 11 years ago that the Maidan took place. Everybody's talking about the Maidan today, and we understand that is, one of the foundational things that got us to where we are today. But even 10 years before that was the color revolution The CIA was behind that, Mr. President. You might want to look into that one, where we tried to destroy Ukrainian democracy by bringing in Ukrainian nationalists. What I'm trying to say, Mr. President, is that time goes by relatively fast. And in a blink of an eye, we're going to be 11 years down the road, and Russia's going to be in a crisis, and we're going to be the adversary still seeking the strategic defeat of Russia. And at that point in time, we will be at a greater risk of nuclear war than you could possibly imagine. Do you want to avoid this, Mr. President? Then don't go the hard way. Be a strategic thinker here. Now's the time, as you indicated, to make a deal. There is a deal to be made. It's an easy deal. The Russians are ready for it, but it's a deal that has to recognize the Russian victory. This isn't a draw, not even close. And everything Russia wants is not only good for Russia, but good for European security that you claim you want. And it actually is good for the Ukrainian people because the current government has destroyed Ukraine. So make the deal, walk away from this thing the way you want to do. It's called the easy way. Take the easy path, and you're not only going to create the conditions for political victory for yourself, you might get the Nobel Peace Prize, but you also avoid that strategic problem that's going to come down 30 years from now, or 10 years from now, in the 2030s. And you're supposed to be making America great again. If you're setting this up for a nuclear war with Russia in 10 years, that's not making America great again. That's just America being stupid all over it.
Yeah. Well, one thing, in defense of Trump, he had bone spurs for Vietnam. He didn't know which foot he had the bone spurs in, but he had bone spurs. So there was that.
Well, it does hurt. Bone spurs, too.
Yeah, bone spurs. He said he got the bone spurs. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he said his Vietnam was dodging syphilis or something like that. Something insane that Donald Trump said on this angle. No, man, I agree with everything.
A lot of guys were doing that in Bangkok too on R&R. So yeah, I get it, Mr. President. Oh, but they wore uniforms, and when they finished dodging it, they went back to the front lines. It's okay, Mr. President. Keep going. You're convincing me here that you're quite the man.
You're absolutely right, and I agree with everything you said in that. I do you think? God, man, there's so much that you said right there that I agree with. I get the sense that, one, Putin wants to resolve this, meaning I don't think he wants to go to this kind of interregnum in 10 years. I think it's, no, I want to get a security architecture of Europe. This is my mission at this point. I'm going to resolve this very specific issue. I'm not going to let another generation have to deal with this. There's that part. On the other part, is there a strategy here? And the reason why I ask this, if you listen to Trump, you're getting this kind of weird vacillation where it sounds like he's saying two things. In one sense, NATO was always a red line. We have to, we need to pay attention to the Russians on this. This was always a problem. This was always bad. Then you get Marco Rubio going out saying we need to end this war. This war has been costly. We can't just give money ridiculously to Ukraine. And then you get this kind of flip where he's like, yeah, Russia has a failing economy. Forget the fact that Russia has surpassed Germany at this point in regards to economic output. I think they're like 4 or 5. They've leapfrogged Germany. Put that to the side, meaning put the bad details, the bad facts of history, all that stuff to the side. Is it possible that there's a play going on here of maximizing and also sympathizing, maximizing and sympathizing, this kind of back and forth, back and forth? I mean, granted, this is not Europe. Like I was pointing out earlier, it's one thing for Trump to say, well, I'm going to do this to Denmark. And Denmark's thing is, how high do you need my ass to be in this moment, Mr. President? Okay, well, that's a vassal. That's different. You're dealing with somebody who's just fundamentally destroyed NATO on the battlefield, that you have zero capacity to escalate on, short of going to some kind of nuclear war. So even if he's getting it wrong, do you think there's some kind of strategy at play here in the way that he's thinking about it, in this kind of vacillating back and forth between conciliatory, ultimatum? What are your thoughts?
Look, there is I've said this, and I've been following some Russian blogs that have been saying something similar. Mm-hmm. There is the potential for a game being played. Putin not Putin. Trump's whole thing is peace through strength. Trump has to be seen as being strong, has to be posturing. And so a lot of that post he put out, the hard way, I call it, that's puffing up your chest and doing this kind of thing, getting in your face and all that. First of all, he's not in Putin's face. Putin's back there doing a national security conference call where he says, hey, Trump won, congratulations, we're ready to work with you. There's but just got to be realistically based. We're the potential there. But let's look at the other thing that Trump's doing here, because you can't view the Ukraine thing in isolation. There's NATO and there's Europe that are at play here. There's Ukraine that's at play here. Trump now has gone away from the 24-hour, I'm going to solve this thing with one magic phone call, to this is going to take time. He's given Keith Kellogg 100 days. Mm-hmm. You got 100 days, Keith, to fix this thing. Fix it. Meanwhile, while Keith's got his 100 days, Trump's saying we're trying to line up a phone conversation with Putin as soon as possible. That's going to be inside that 100-day window. That phone call is more important than Keith Kellogg's 100 days, except for this. What's happening in that 100 days? See, I don't think Trump is going to sanction Putin in those 100 days. In fact, there might be some talk about lifting sanctions, et cetera. We know that the United States has come out, that Trump has come out and said, Zelensky, you're not getting the 4 territories back. You're not getting the Crimea back. Right. And Zelensky's at Davos crying in his beer. He's, no, we're not going to play. Zelensky, you're irrelevant. And also Zelensky's he's coming out with the fact that when this ends on Russia, Zelensky won't be there. Russia's already said, you got to go and we're going to replace you with somebody. That's the reality. So Zelensky, no. If the rumors are true, Russia, Trump did sign an executive order that bans the foreign aid. It puts a freeze on foreign aid. But there are exceptions, and I think the Ukrainian aid comes into that exception. But there's also talk that he has basically told the Pentagon to freeze everything while we do anything. If this is true, and I don't know if it is, but if it is true, he basically shut off aid to Ukraine. And over the course of 100 days, because it seems to be on a parallel one, Ukraine is going to wither on the vine. And then he turned around to NATO and said, you got to spend more, 5%. No, NATO will never meet the 5%. They've had trouble meeting the 2%. NATO can't meet the 5%. We see NATO states saying we're going to have to cut pensions and, we're going to have to cut welfare. We're going to have to cut all the social programs. That's economically, isn't socially, politically unviable. So NATO can never meet that standard. Ukraine isn't getting new equipment. And so what Trump is doing is setting up Ukraine and NATO for failure. And what he may be doing is tell Putin, you got 100 days to create the reality that you want for this war to be over. So in 100 days, do whatever you need to do to take whatever territory you need to take, to destroy whatever you need to destroy, to posture yourself wherever you need to be postured. And then we're going to end this thing. And in the meantime, I'll have confronted NATO with the fact that, they can't afford to be, it's like coming to a poker table, where the buy-in's, $100 billion and NATO's got $46.12 in their pocket. They can't sit down at this table. They don't have the ability. So there might be this kind of game being played right here where Trump is posturing and yet creating the conditions that will provide Russia with a window to get what it needs to get and then agree to this thing. But, the closure is another thing. There's no going to be frozen battlefield. Right. There's not going to be 200,000 peacekeepers, European peacekeepers, and that's not going to happen. The war will end the way Russia wants it to end, and Trump and Putin have to have this conversation. What I would do is take everything that comes out of this Trump White House with a grain of salt until the conversation with Putin takes place. That's the reality check that will have to happen for Trump. And after that phone conversation, That's when we judge what Trump does or doesn't do. And then we'll know whether or not he has a grand strategy or if he's just an idiot who thinks the hard way is the only way that he's going to get it. But there's the potential for such a grand strategy you're talking about. But again, none of it matters until he has the conversation with the only person that matters, who is Vladimir Putin.
Yeah. Yeah, I get the sense this may be a bit of posturing, but I agree with you. We got to see the phone call first. Speaking of European troops on the ground, I want to get your take on Zelensky. So he came out, and not just European peacekeepers. I mean, honestly, he looks like a desperate man at this point. Every time I've seen him, he's either begging for money, saying, oh, we're not getting enough money. Or in this case, I think he knows the bell is being rung at this point for him. I'm going to play this clip.
It's great if we will have troops. But we have to understand that the troops will not be in the center of the capital.
Yes.
They will not have relaxed time. Yes, it's very important because I heard that some allies said that, yes, but it's okay. We can be in the center of some city. And then, no, we don't need such contingent.
You want them at the front line?
Yes, with our people, of course. Yes, because this means security, and that's it. So, but it can't be without the United States. I will explain you why. Even if some European friends think that it can be, no, it will not be. First of all, nobody will.
He wants U.S. troops on the ground in Ukraine, and he believes that Russia is going to be okay with that. He is in a fantasy land, isn't he? I mean, this is outrageous.
You know, sometimes there's masterpieces on X, in the comments and all that. And I just wish I was clever enough, because I will tell you, when I saw that clip, the first thing that came to my mind is the actor in Goodfellas. At the end, when he's snorting cocaine like you wouldn't believe, and he's falling apart, and he's just twitching in the sky and looking at everything, and his eyes are like this, and he's only snorting cocaine. And I'm not being facetious here. That man's high on cocaine right there. Yeah. He's got the sniffles going, and he's just twitching, and his eyes are like this. That man is on drugs, literally on drugs. We've known he has a drug problem, but here it is. But he's just like the character at the end of the Goodfellas, where Ray
Liotta. Yeah, Ray Liotta.
That's him. But let's just talk about reality. Forget U.S. troops. The number of peacekeepers that are being touted out there is 200,000. Now, let me give you some reality here. One, NATO can't deploy 200,000 troops anywhere. They can't get 200,000 troops out of the barracks. But it's not 200,000. To do a rotation like that, just the way rotations work, you'll have 200,000 troops deployed. You'll have 200,000 troops training up. It's a 6-month rotation, tends to be. It's 200,000 troops training up to replace those 200,000. And then you have 200,000 troops on standby, on leave or whatever. Because remember, this is peacetime military. So that's 600,000. To have a peacekeeper force in Ukraine is 600,000 troops that NATO doesn't have. So this is just, again, the fantasy of Ray Liotta, Zelensky's little, desperate cocaine-fueled character at the end. It can't happen. The best NATO could probably do is crank out something in the area of 50 to 60,000 troops. But even then, now we're talking 150 to 180,000 dedicated troops. That means their sole mission becomes peacekeeping in Ukraine. And this is the time when NATO says, well, if we do that, we also have to prepare for Russia to, move in. We got to build up our military. And again, I'm just going to throw out two numbers, 2% and 5%. This is what, Trump has said. I'll throw another number there in a minute. 2% is the GDP level that NATO's supposed to be meeting now. They're not. Can't afford to. 5% is the level that Trump says they have to meet to do all this stuff. But to do something like this, you're talking 10 to 15% to afford everything that is out there. They can't do it. This is literally too much cocaine going into the bloodstream of a already desperate, crazy man. But people like Keith Kellogg are snorting the cocaine too. There's because remember there was that girl that was supplying him. She was snorting the cocaine, and everybody was snorting the cocaine, and he wasn't able to sell the cocaine because he was snorting.
Right.
So everybody around Zelensky and everybody who's advising the president is snorting cocaine. It's Ukrainian disinformation designed to make you feel that Russia's being beaten, all this stuff. But why in God's name would America spend another dime on this cokehead, on this man who has killed over 1 million of his own people, a man who doesn't have a plan? His only plan is you come save me at your expense.
Yep.
I mean, we need to flush Zelensky down the toilet of life as quick as possible. This man has destroyed his country. He's destroying our economy. He's already destroyed Europe. Europe is a basket case. And Trump is going to finish the job of destroying Europe. NATO isn't going to survive this decade. That's my prediction. Because the conditions that's Trump setting for the continued viability of NATO cannot be reached by NATO. And at that point in time, Trump will say, well, then maybe we don't want to have anything because we're not going to underwrite it. The United States isn't going to underwrite NATO. So it's the end of NATO. It's the end of the European Union. Trump is rejecting everything about the European Union. So Zelensky lives in a coke-fueled never land. He's irrelevant. The problem is he speaks. This clip gets on there. Americans look at that. They take it seriously, and then Keith Kellogg fuels it by saying stupidity, and then Trump throws out a tweet that talks about the hard way, and we begin to think that that's reality. Mm-hmm. Reality is something totally different. And if you're not following Russia, look, the Russian economy, is it the healthiest economy in the world? No. Have sanctions had an impact on the Russian economy? Yes.
But it's like number 4.
The head of the Russian bank, this lady whose name I can't pronounce, she admits that Russia has to play games to keep the economy. Russia's inflation right now is around 9%, 9.1%. That's high. You don't want 9.1%. But again, everybody's like, that's the end of Russia. Do you know what Russian inflation was in 2000 when Vladimir Putin took over? 2,000%. Wow. Now, again, I'm just a simple Marine. Wow. But 9% and 2,000% are totally different economic realities. Russia's playing. Do you think the Americans could do what Russia's done with its defense industry, the mobilization of defense industry, the shifting of economic focus away from the West to the East in 3 years? Remember, 3 years ago, Russia was focused on the West until we sanctioned them. They've transitioned to the East. They've mobilized their defense industry, and they have a high standard of living in Russia. Do you think there's any nation on this planet that could have done that? And the answer is no. All right, they did it. But they've got a supercharged economy right now, 9% inflation. It may go up to 10%. It may go up to 12%. It's a problem but it's not the end of the world kind of problem.
Right.
The end of the world kind of problem is 2,000% inflation. Russia's not going back there. And Russia has built an economic plan designed to sustain this for at least another 2 to 3 years, meaning they're ready for this conflict to go on till 2028. They've made all the decisions. They got a plan, Mr. President. You don't have a plan. You're walking into their trap because your presidency, with all due respect to your belief in your own immortality, wins in 4 years. Okay, they're ready to walk this through at least 3 of those 4 years, and they could extend it to another one. Putin will outlast you, Mr. President, and he'll probably, if you go down this route, he'll probably outlast. If J.D. Vance wins the presidency after you, he'll outlast him because Vance will be a 4-year president because you'll become a failed president. You're just setting yourself up for failure. Putin's going to outlast you all because he has a plan.
Let me ask you. Oh, no, please.
I'm just saying, one of the things, in the military, they taught me, you might have learned this, Mr. President, had you not had bone spurs. I'm sorry about your bone spurs. It's a tragedy. But if you had gone in the military, you might have learned something about what they call the OODA loop. And it's basically getting inside the enemy's decision-making cycle. OODA is observe, orient, decide, act. John Boyd came up with, he's a fighter pilot, and it was his way. I think they call him 30-second Boyd, and he could go head-to-head with you in a fight, and then by making moves, he'd get you to react until he was in a superior position, he'd shoot you down. And so we take that and we apply it to a whole bunch of things. On the battlefield, the Marine Corps, the way we did maneuver warfare was to get inside the enemy's decision-making cycle, to initiate action in a way that compelled the enemy to respond the way we were designing it to be, so that the battlefield unfolded the way we wanted it to unfold, and we imposed our will on the enemy. Putin has a plan, which means if you don't have a plan, you're reacting to his plan. You just lost, Mr. President. You see, in the OODA loop cycle thing, if you're reacting to the other guy, you're losing. You're that pilot that's going to get shot down. Putin has a plan. You're reacting to his plan. What you need to do, Mr. President, is get Russia to react to your plan. All right? They've already built into their system everything you think you're going to do, because the Russians are smarter than you, Mr. President. They've anticipated everything you think you can do to them. Just ask the people that thought they were going to shut down Russia's ability to sell oil by making it impossible for them to ensure their shipping. Instantly, Russia has a ghost fleet of tankers. How did that happen, Mr. President? Oh, they anticipated. They are 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 20 or 100 steps ahead of you, Mr. President. You will never catch up if you're playing this game. All right? Because it's their game. You need to change that game. Not to defeat them, but to ensure that we don't be defeated. You want to get ahead of them, make them react to you. Tell Putin, I agree to everything you just said. The Russians are in a panic there, man, because they don't have a plan for that. They don't have a plan for success on this one because they don't anticipate success.
Oh, that's a good point.
Get ahead of them.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because you know what you want, Mr. President. You want out of Europe. You want out. The best way to do this, you can't get called, Mr. President. We can make this work. Is to give the Russians what they want up front. Because now what happens is Russia they have to deal with success. Now the next step, they're reacting to you, Mr. President. You put the proposal on the table. You make the Russians respond to your initiative. And suddenly you're in charge of redefining U.S.-Russian relations. And if you do it smartly, they're not going into a trap that's to their detriment. You both are going down a path that can lead to better relations, but on terms set by the United States that are to the benefit of the United States. That's what you need to do, Mr. President. You need to be smarter than this puffery, chest-puffing nonsense that's going on right now. You're not going to intimidate Vladimir Putin. What you can do is take advantage of the fact that Russia is geared right now towards conflict. And by offering them legitimate peace, you're now in control of the agenda. That's what I would be doing, Mr. President.
Scott, I get the sense that Putin wants something more than just ending the war. I get the sense he wants this kind of new security architecture of Europe. What does that look like in practice? Well,
the Russians have already told us, because they published draft treaties. They gave it to us on December 17th, 2021. Yeah. They put a draft treaty to NATO and a draft treaty to the United States. And it's basically setting up a European security framework that respects Russia's spheres of influence. The problem is that treaty was given to NATO before the special military operation. Mm-hmm. There's a new reality right now. One of those realities is that NATO is not going to be here much longer. And so when we speak of a European security framework, it has to be a post-NATO framework or an extremely diminished NATO framework. And Russia, again, will have the advantage if we go down there unless we preempt them with some sort of thing. But you're right. The special military operation is just a tactic to a larger strategic objective of stability, which is the direction Russia wants to go. Stability that has Russia peacefully coexisting with Europe in a new non-partner relationship. Russia's not looking to be friends or partners with Europe. They used to be, but Russia's made the big pivot. That's why BRICS is such a big deal. But a European security framework is one where there can be economic interaction. Russian energy will be available for Europe, if they want it. But Europe is not going to pour back into the Russian economy and control major aspects of the Russian economy. There can be European investment, but it'll be controlled investment. It'll be a healthier relationship. Russia's relationship with the West up until the special military operation was a very unhealthy relationship because it was the abusive relationship that was begun in the 1990s when we were seeking to, control Russia, to break Russia apart. Russia's not. This is like, if you were in an abusive relationship with a girl and you guys broke up, and now she says, well, we can be friends again, but there's new rules. The rules are
right.
I'm not playing your game anymore. You don't get to abuse me anymore. But maybe we had a child in joint custody, but you're going to have custody under my rules and all that kind of stuff. That's it. I mean, I hate to make Russia the woman in this, but we abused Russia. We really did. We were an abusive. We were bad friends, horrible friends, because we're never really friends with Russia. We always want to exploit Russia. Russia's willing to be friends, but it has to be a genuine friendship that isn't based upon one side seeking to dominate the other. And so, I think Russia's willing to bring us into the friend zone, but not anything. There's not going to be a relationship. Okay, that's it. We go into the friend zone, but you're not going to get all the things that you used to get from Russia. Those days are done. Russia's moved on.
Yeah. Let me ask you this before we close up. We have about 6 minutes, give or take. I want to get your take on the ceasefire deal for Israel, the quote unquote ceasefire. And, Witkoff, I believe his name, goes over there, basically reads the riot act in a very salty language in order to get the deal. It was the deal that was on the table for the last year that nobody moved on because Joe Biden wasn't really pushing for any kind of deal at all behind the scenes. We're finding out. But Trump gets the ceasefire. Trump is asked whether or not he thinks the ceasefire is going to last. He was like, I'm not sure. This isn't my war. It's not, this isn't really any of my business. So Netanyahu, who is dealing with many in Israel who being pissed off that he accepted this deal, or at the very least was pushed into this deal, came out and he said this, and I want to get your take on it. Because according to Netanyahu, Donald Trump, and for that matter, Joe Biden, made the deal that they can reinvigorate the war at any moment, meaning at any time that they want, they can resume the war. And I want to get your take on this comment. If I can get this, it's going to be too loud. There we are.
Was elected, Trump was completely committed to the release of the hostages. We spoke on Wednesday. He congratulated me on the agreement, and he emphasized, and rightly so, that the first stage is a temporary ceasefire. This is what he said, a temporary ceasefire. Towards the next stages of the agreement, we are holding on to some significant assets so that we can bring back all of the hostages, and in order to accomplish all the goals of the war. Both President Trump and President Biden have provided full backing to Israel's right to resume fighting, to resume combat, if Israel reaches the conclusion that the negotiations over the second stage are pointless. I truly appreciate that. I also appreciate the decision of President Trump to lift all the remaining restrictions on the providing of essential.
I have a hard time listening to him, if I'm being honest. Give me your take on this. I mean, do you give any real validity to the ceasefire? Do you think there's any lasting quality to it? I mean, when I was listening to Steve, the guy who went over there, Witkoff, or I may be getting the name wrong, he sounded like he was serious about, on some level, pushing this deal through. is this bluster by Netanyahu, or no? This is the reality of events, where this is a temporary ceasefire. They're going to go back to operations the moment that they get their hostages back. What are your thoughts? And we have about 4 minutes.
I mean, have you ever watched a coach of a losing team try and explain how he won the game, even though he didn't win the game? You know, we had a solid blocking, and we had this, and we've got future depth and all that. That's Netanyahu. It's pure spin. There's no doubt in my mind that Trump told Netanyahu that if Hamas violates this, that Israel can go back in. There's no doubt in my mind he said it, but it's not any time Israel wants to, and this. No, Trump. Let me tell you why this is a real ceasefire. Because Trump's a strategic thinker in the Middle East. See, this ceasefire solves the problem of the Houthi. It solves the problem of Hezbollah, because both Hezbollah and the Houthis' engagement with Israel was because of the refusal of Israel to have a ceasefire. Okay, that ceasefire is in place. It also takes Iran out of the picture. See, Trump isn't looking for a broader conflict in the Middle East. He's looking to end the conflict in the Middle East. And to do that, he has to be able to negotiate with Iran, because he wants to negotiate with Iran. We know he wants to negotiate with Iran. He wants a better nuclear deal. That's his strategic focus, and he's not going to let Benjamin Netanyahu screw this up for him. So Netanyahu can spin this any way he wants. And if Hamas wants to violate this, but I don't know, did you look at the videos that came out of Gaza?
Yes.
Of the defeated Hamas? I mean, man, they look tough, because they were all beat up and they had the white flags and they were bleeding. Their uniforms were ripped up and their weapons were, oh no, they looked like they were well fed, and they were stuffed, that studs with the green headbands, and they were running around. That wasn't a defeated military, guys. That's a victorious military that took on one of the world's largest, most sophisticated, Western militaries and fought them to a standstill. Hamas was supposed to have been physically destroyed by Israel. That wasn't a physically destroyed fighting force. And you also have to remember, in the lead up to the ceasefire, Israel was taking very heavy casualties in Gaza. The Israeli army does not want to go back to Gaza. That would be a disaster for them. So I think you're going to see that there isn't going to be violation. We're seeing that Israel has been given sort of a green light to go into the West Bank to clean up issues there. That's separate. But Gaza itself, I think you're going to see, is going to get into the business of reconstruction, rebuilding, etc. It's not a perfect solution, but I don't see this as being a game by Trump. I think Trump is serious about a ceasefire because it anchors what he wants to do strategically in the region. And I think Trump is going to hold Netanyahu's feet to the fire. And I think Hamas understands that as long as they, do what they've committed to do, and I think they're serious about doing that, they come out stronger. Hamas is not politically destroyed; they're not militarily defeated. And Hamas is basically the driving force behind the Palestinian movement today. On October 6th, Hamas was fading fast, being isolated, pushed to the side, forgotten. Completely different reality today. Tragically, it had to take, tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 Palestinian lives to make this happen. But I think you're going to see that Gaza will never again be an open-air prison camp. That Gaza is going to be rebuilt in the vision of the Palestinians of Gaza, and it's going to be part of a new approach towards the creation of a Palestinian state that now the world, because the other thing that's changed is the world's opinion of Israel has changed, because Israel has been exposed as a genocidal state. So I think that this isn't 100%. Nobody trusts Israel. I don't trust Israel, and but I do think we need to understand that Trump isn't the compliant tool of Zionism that everybody thought he was. That Trump has a vision that benefits the United States of America first, and that vision is peace. He needs to have stability in the Middle East so that he can redirect his attention elsewhere, and that stability can't happen unless there's a ceasefire that holds in Gaza.
From your mouth to God's ears, Scott. Man, thank you for this, Scott. Really appreciate you, man. Always appreciate talking to you. Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector and weapons of mass destruction whistleblower. You can follow Scott on Telegram at Scott Ritter. Thank you for this, Scott. Always, like I said, I always appreciate talking to you, man. I really like your point of view. Have a good one, man. All right. I would like to go to my next guest. we haven't had him on for a while, so I'm glad to have him. And I hit him up yesterday. He was nice enough to say yes. So Robert Fatima, he is an author, journalist, and activist working for peace, social justice. He is author of the new book, Settler Colonialism in Palestine and Kashmir. Robert, man, welcome to the show. How you doing today? You doing all right?
Thank you very much. I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you for joining me. Seeing as you wrote the book on settler colonialism, I want to get your take on the same question that I asked Scott. Basically, I just to preempt it, I was showing in the clip that Netanyahu said, basically, yeah, Trump is allowing a temporary ceasefire. And he was effectively saying that this is a ceasefire in name only. That was the connotation that he effectively gave with it. And Ritter's point was, well, this is not a ceasefire in name only. Donald Trump doesn't necessarily want a war in the Middle East. He wants to kind of end these conflicts. I want to, and in fact, I want to preempt that with something else, or at the very least, I want to piggyback that with something else. Let me get your take on this clip, because when I first saw this clip, this blew my mind. Because for up to this point, everything that has come out for Trump has been completely obsequious to Netanyahu. I played this clip for the audience once before. The audience has seen it. But this is Donald Trump talking about Netanyahu and talking about Abbas. And let's do this.
I think it's a terrible personal trait. I haven't spoken to him since, right? I didn't talk to him. I thought he wanted to make a deal more than Netanyahu. And I will be honest, I had a great meeting with him, Abbas, right? I had a great meeting with him. And we spent a lot of time together, talked about many things. And it was almost like a father. I mean, he was so nice. Couldn't have been nicer. And after meeting with Bibi for 3 minutes, I looked at him and said, you don't want to make a deal, do you? And he said, well, and the fact is, I don't think Bibi ever wanted to make a deal. Why? I thought the Palestinians were impossible, and the Israelis would do anything to make peace and a deal. I found that not to be true.
I was blown away by that clip. And the reason why I give Scott some credence in saying that, well, yeah, maybe Trump doesn't want this kind of war to propagate in the Middle East, that he does want some kind of deal in the Middle East. It's for clips like that. And even the Jeffrey Sachs one, where Jeffrey Sachs called Netanyahu a deep, dark son of a bitch, saying that he was pushing the United States into all of these wars, and that basically impugning Netanyahu's character, whatever that character is. Give me your take on this. Do you think that the ceasefire is legit? And do you think that the Trump administration is serious about, use the term enforce the ceasefire? What are your thoughts?
No to both questions. One, there is evidence that Netanyahu has assured his former minister Ben-Gvir and his current minister Smotrich that this ceasefire is just a ruse to release the hostages. Once the hostages are released, Netanyahu will claim that Hamas has violated the ceasefire in some way and will begin the same genocidal actions that it's been doing for the last 15 months. So I don't think, one thing I agree with Trump, and there's not much I agree with him on, is that he said he realized Netanyahu does not want to make a deal. That has been realized by most of the world for a long time. Netanyahu isn't interested in a deal. He isn't interested in peace with the Palestinians. He's interested in the ethnic cleansing or genocide of all the Palestinians and the annexation, the complete annexation of Palestine by Israel. That has been his motivation all along. So recently, the last few days, Trump was asked if he thinks the ceasefire will hold, and he said, I don't know, it's their war, not ours. Yeah. So the fact that he doesn't want to get the U.S. involved in wars doesn't mean that he won't look the other way when one of his cronies, and he has great admiration for Netanyahu because Netanyahu is a strong man. He's a dictator. He runs the show, and Trump likes that. He's not going to interfere with him. Additionally, you have the U.S. Congress to deal with, who is beholden to the pro-Israeli lobbies. They get millions and millions of dollars in campaign contributions. They're not going to bite the hand that feeds them. So we've seen already that Trump has eliminated the sanctions against the terrorist attackers in the West Bank. His nominee, what's Elsie Stefanik? I'm not sure I pronounced that right. She has said that she believes that God promised all of that territory to the Israelis. So one of his cabinet ministers, at least one, is saying that U.S. governance should be directed by biblical statements.
It's just outrageous.
It's
I saw that
absolutely
statement.
outrageous. And this,
and by the way, she wouldn't even acknowledge this kind of Palestinian self-determination. She was like, "I'm not." She wouldn't say it.
She wouldn't. She said, "Oh, the Palestinians deserve much better." She was asked directly, "Do they? Yes or no? Do they deserve self-determination?" Well, they deserve much better than they have. She wouldn't answer that question, as you just said.
It seems that a deal has been made, a ceasefire for the West Bank. Basically, a ceasefire in Gaza in order to allow Israel to take the West Bank. Because there was a question of, okay, well, what did Donald Trump promise in order to get this deal? Yeah, you can bully, but was it this notion of, we'll give you a free hand in the West Bank if you allow a ceasefire, even if the ceasefire is temporary? I mean, I've been watching what they've been doing in the West Bank. This has been appalling. I know I didn't bring you on for this, but you wrote the book, so I figured you'd be the person to talk to about it. What is going on in the West Bank? I mean, there was this talk that they were going to annex the West Bank. I mean, this was stuff that there was kind of in the reporting that was coming out of Haaretz and some of the other journals about some of the conversations that was taking place in the Netanyahu government. Do you see that happening? Is that what's taking place? Is that what we're seeing now?
Yes, there are a couple of things. One, Netanyahu's spokespeople have said they are practicing in the West Bank what they learned in Gaza. So the same kind of terrorism. It's not the same degree yet, but people are suffering horribly in the West Bank. That's been overlooked because of what's been happening in Gaza. But the motivation has always been annexation. We've seen it with the encroaching settlements. There's something like 800,000 illegal settlers living in the West Bank. Netanyahu has said not one of them will ever have to leave. All those settlements are illegal according to international law. Annexation is illegal according to international law. But international law is something that the Israeli government and the U.S. government have both proven they don't care about. It's their way or the highway. If they want to annex anything, they'll annex it. That's what Trump's talking about with the Panama Canal, Greenland, even Canada. So the idea of territorial integrity, of internationally recognized borders, these are not things that are of any concern to Netanyahu or Trump. So yes, what's happening in the West Bank is unspeakable, but it is part of the motivation and the process of the illegal annexation of the West Bank.
I was looking at some of the images that were coming out of Gaza. These images are heartbreaking. I'm going to show, let me see, just so the audience can see what I am talking about here with some of these images. This is stunning. So this is the hospital. What is it? Adjuswan Hospital, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong with the name. And that hospital stayed there. I think it was one of the last hospitals in Gaza, just staying there, still dealing with patients, even when they were surrounded. And finally, when the doctor came out, the doctor was with the electric cord for his resistance to this level of barbarity. And, there are other images that are even more haunting, if such a thing could exist. I mean, in that picture, what you're seeing is clothing that was laid on the ground when the doctors and nurses came out. They were forced to strip. Here's another one on the level of devastation in Gaza also. It is hard to wrap your head around this. Like, it's just astonishing. How on earth are they expected to replenish this? Like, I mean, if you're right, then they're going to resume operations anyway. And I don't even know what else you can bomb at this point. But assuming for the moment that the ceasefire lasts for any length of time, how do you rebuild that? Is it possible to even rebuild that?
It will take years and years. And if Israel continues to blockade the Gaza Strip and only allow certain materials, it'll take, I read an estimate, 300 years. So whether the international community will allow this because it's allowed so much in the past remains to be seen. But Gaza can be rebuilt. The people of Gaza are very resilient. Many are trying to return to their homes or what's left of their homes in the north of Gaza now. I'm in contact with a few people in Gaza, and the horrific scenes that you've shown are scenes I've seen before. The world has to see these. But as far as rebuilding, it will take billions and billions of dollars in the efforts of several countries. The United States should have no involvement in it whatsoever, but other countries should, Middle Eastern countries certainly, China or Russia, if it's able to, they should be involved in the rebuilding, because it needs to, all the debris needs to be cleared, and people need to be housed during that time, and buildings need to be rebuilt. I want to just point out also that when you were showing the scenes from the hospital, one of the hospitals in Gaza, and the just utter destruction of it, bombing a hospital is a war crime. It is not legal under any circumstances. International law says clearly that even if there are so-called enemy soldiers hiding in the hospital, it is not legal to bomb the hospital. There has to be some kind of targeted attack. Now, again, we talk about, or we don't, but much of the media talks about Israel's right to defend itself. There is no right in international law for a country to defend itself against another country that it occupies. But there is a right in international law for the occupied country to resist the occupation in any way at its disposal, including armed struggle, which is what Palestine did on October 7th of 2023, and what it continues to do today.
You're absolutely right. It's amazing to me how the way they always kind of ignore that other part. Like for example, Israel will make this argument. We blew up an apartment complex and we killed 60 people because there was one person there. And it's like, okay, well, you need to be really careful with that line of argument. So if Hamas goes in, blow up a delicatessen, killing 20 people because there might be one person there that's a soldier, is that okay? And of course, the answer would be no. No, that's unacceptable. It's like, but that's what you do. That's been the modus operandi going all the way through this particular quote unquote war, as they call it. I mean, for all intents and purposes, this is not a war. These are not two sides with tanks. This is one side with nuclear weapons, fighting basically a resistance group at this point. Give me your take on, like, I always come to this conclusion that we can't go back to what it was on October 7th. But maybe I'm wrong on that. I mean, am I wrong on that? Like the entire way through, I kept saying to myself, there is no way we can go back to what's called normal with this kind of open air ghetto. But am I wrong on that? Am I being too hopeful that the result of this conflict and how, like, the loss of life, especially to the degree, I mean, we're talking about like 100,000 people dead, at least if we're going by Lancet numbers, and they're like digging people out of the rubble by the tune of hundreds. Am I wrong on that? Do we go back to some kind of relative normality with an open air ghetto? Or is this something else, something different with the expenditure of this much life loss?
Well, I hope that it will be there will be a change. I'm cautiously optimistic about that, but there is a strong possibility that things will go back to the way they've been for the last 50-some years in Gaza, and the last 77 throughout Palestine. The reason for this is associated with what you said before about how bombing an apartment building with 60 people because there might be one rebel in the building, but it's okay to kill those 60. But the reverse isn't true if someone blows up a delicatessen in Tel Aviv.
Right.
This is because of the Israeli government, and a large number of the Israeli people do not see Palestinians or any Arab as human. They're not equal to them. They are lesser. Their lives are expendable. And so killing them is no different than calling an exterminator because you have mice in your house. It's just getting rid of them. You don't think about them. Don't give them a second thought, whether they're men, women, and children. The population of Gaza prior to this genocide was 50% were under the age of 16. So that means 50% children. And as you said, at least 100,000 people have been killed. Now, you also talked about how, again, the 60 people bombed in a building to get one. Israel has the capability to do targeted assassinations, which they have done in Iran on more than one occasion, where they will single out one, usually a nuclear scientist, someone he might be riding his motorcycle through the streets and he is assassinated. But They don't do this in Gaza because, well, these are simply Arabs. We can eliminate them all. Plus, there's the motivation of the more you kill and the more you exterminate, the easier it will be to annex the Gaza Strip. So I'm not optimistic about the ceasefire holding. I'm not optimistic about Netanyahu's and Israel's integrity regarding this, their desire to have a genuine ceasefire and to live peacefully with Palestinians. And I'm not optimistic about the world community that has allowed war crimes, crimes against humanity, to be committed on a daily basis for the past 15 months, which we're all seeing on social media. I'm not optimistic about the international community preventing a return to the normal that the Palestinians have suffered from for all these generations.
How do you frame a solution to this? Because, when I've had a conversation with Israelis, it is a maddening conversation. In one sense, they would say, well, we don't want to live beside the Palestinians, so there's that. Two, we don't want to subsume the Palestinians. So it's like, we don't want a one-state solution, and we don't want a two-state solution. And they would say, well, we don't want a one-state solution because that's not Israel. That's not a Jewish state at that point. That's something else. And we want our Jewish state. And so it's like, okay, well, what about the two-state? And in the honest truth of it, as Donald Trump was talking about back then, Netanyahu doesn't want a two-state solution. Israelis in general. It's a fascist country. I've been to the country a few times. That is not their mindset. Like you say, they don't see them as human beings. So I'm at a loss for a solution. I mean, under their model, the only thing that you could do is exterminate everybody or push them out of the country. There's no other way around it if you're not on board for some kind of either one-state or two-state solution. Or is there something more clever that I'm just fundamentally missing? What's the outcome? What's the object? Like, what is the objective to shoot for? Because the two-state solution has always been used as this kind of dog and pony show without any real, reality associated with it. It's what politicians say for political expedience. It's not necessarily something that they actually do in order to make happen. Give me your thoughts on this.
Right. And the two-state solution, the U.S. government has always said the borders have to be established by negotiation between the two parties. Well, negotiations can't occur unless each party has something the other wants that it can only get by surrendering something it has. Israel takes whatever it wants with complete impunity. The Israeli government is always saying, "Oh, we'll negotiate without conditions." Well, of course, because they don't need anything. They can kill, steal, kidnap, arrest, anything they want. So, and with impunity. What needs to happen is the borders of Israel and Palestine were established unjustly, I will submit, but they were established in 1947, 1948. Since then, Israel has continually encroached on Palestine's borders with the illegal settlements, with the blockade of the Gaza Strip and so on, and the continued bombing. The international community has allowed this. What the international community needs to do is say enough. They need to further ostracize Israel. Now, something like 14 countries have now joined South Africa at the International Court of Justice to prosecute Israel for genocide. More countries have to do this. More countries have to sever ties with Israel. The victim card that Israel has played for so long has long since expired, and countries need to recognize that. Germany, which is providing the second largest amount of weapons to Israel for this genocide after the United States, the German government somehow thinks that it can compensate for one genocide by committing another one, by being complicit in another one. This makes no sense. The international community has to step up. That's difficult because in the United Nations Security Council, the United States has veto power, which is used repeatedly to protect Israel from its crimes. So that needs to be revamped. The General Assembly, which has the capacity, it's not easy to do, to override a UN Security Council veto, needs to implement that. But there needs to be this realization that, as you mentioned, Israel is a fascist state. It's an apartheid state. The Israeli government declared itself the nation state of the Jewish people a number of years ago. You can't be a Jewish state and democratic state. They don't go together.
Right.
That means everyone who isn't Jewish is a second-class citizen, as they are in Israel. So the entire world community has to recognize what Israel is and hold it accountable, hold its leaders accountable, hold its people accountable. And that means arrests by the International Court of Justice, trials at The Hague. It means severing relations. It means putting the economic squeeze on Israel. And the Israel economy has suffered greatly in the last 15 months, but the United States is there to bail it out. But this has to stop. International law is the answer. But to get there, countries have to recognize and support and enforce international law.
You may not know this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What is going on internally in Israel? Because as you point out, the United States has been there to bail it out. I mean, we've given them billions, I think like 20, 30 billion, some insane amount of money. And keep in mind, this is not like, Israel is like 8 million people. If you're given that much money, I mean, like that's an astonishing sum of money. That's like more than $1 billion a person. No, I'm getting that wrong. But that's a huge amount of money, is my point. What has happened to the Israeli economy? What has happened? Do you know what's going on internally in the country itself by chance?
What I know is that the economy has taken a major hit. I can't quantify that anymore. I don't know that information. I know that the people in Israel do not feel secure in their homes, not only because of what happened on October 7th, but because of the war with Hezbollah in Lebanon, because of Yemeni attacks, because of Iranian attacks. The people are not secure there, and this war is only causing them to be less secure. It's interesting, you mentioned all the money that the United States has given to Israel. When Hillary Clinton was running for president, or when she was Secretary of State, I'm not sure exactly the time frame, she talked about how Israel has blossomed in the desert, blossomed like a rose. Well, you give that much money to Palestine, and Palestine will blossom like a rose too. But what they have done instead is constrict Palestine by preventing imports and exports, technology. So the Palestinian people have managed, despite these hardships, but give them that same amount of money, and they'll do fine. But in answer to your question, I do know that the economy has slowed down considerably, and that people in Israel are feeling very insecure, as they should, because their country is a rogue regime bombing its neighbors. A country can't do that without some blowback. And that's what Israel has been and continues to receive, not only in terms of, as I mentioned, the bombs and drones from Yemen and Iran and so on, but just from international reputation, which is greatly tarnished, as it should be today.
Does international reputation, clearly it matters. So that's not the question I guess I want to ask. But it doesn't necessarily seem like it has had the bang for the buck that you would think when you have the entire world screaming at you, basically effectively saying you're committing a genocide, and you continue to commit the genocide. I've said on more than one occasion, international law doesn't exist. And, we've ended up in this place where might makes right, even if it's wrong. And I have to be honest with you, I have been shocked completely. I would have never thought that we would have been okay, funded, backed, the complete destruction and murder on a large scale in the way that we have. I have never seen anything like this. Nothing in my lifetime has come close to this. And yet here we are, and it continues. Like, I don't know where to place that. And when my country has foot the bill to 70 to 80% of the resources that has gone into it, I don't know what to do with that. I just don't know what to do with that. Give me your take just to close it. How do you frame that? Because I don't have a good framing for that. I feel guilty about it because my tax dollars go into that. I've sat there and we get desensitized on some level to watching just murder on our screens day after day after day, and it doesn't stop. It keeps going. Give me your take on this.
There are a few things that, one, the fact that the government is okay with this. One of the reasons I believe that Donald Trump is president today and not Kamala Harris is because she would not differentiate from Biden in what's happening in Gaza.
Agreed.
She kept saying, "Oh, the United States is working tirelessly for a ceasefire." That makes no sense when the United States was supplying, as you said, 60 to 70% of the weapons for this genocide, and not only the weapons that it normally sends, hundreds of millions of dollars of additional weaponry to finance this genocide. So that, I believe, is why a major reason why Kamala Harris is not president today. The fact that the international community is, or the international reputation of Israel is so tarnished, but the Israeli government will convince most of the people in Israel that it's just anti-Semitism, that people hate Jews, and just the fact that the Israeli government is killing 100,000 people, men, women, and children, defenseless, killing them in the most savage ways, violating international law, committing genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity. Oh no, it's all anti-Semitism. And the people in Israel, many people in Israel, not all certainly, but many people in Israel have grown up with that concept and are willing to accept it. The fact that the United States, Canada, so many Western nations are willing to look the other way is appalling and absolutely, as you said, unbelievable. That our governments, your government, my government, and I have dual citizenship, so U.S. and Canada, but that these governments are supporting this horrendous genocide is beyond comprehension.
Yeah, it's astonishing. It blew me away. I would have, look, man, we have done some horrible things as a country.
Mm-hmm.
This, I would never, like, this blew me away. Robert, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. Robert Fatima, he is author, journalist, and activist working for peace and social justice. He is author of the book, Settler Colonialism in Palestine and Kashmir. Thank you, my man. I appreciate it. Be safe.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. The man of the hour is here. Everybody has been screaming for him. Say, where is he? Mark Frost. Mark Frost is an economist, professor, consultant, drummer, Eagle Scout, Marine, capitalist, Schuptenarian, always love that word, and recovering libertarian. How you doing, Mark? You doing okay, man?
I'm doing really good. It's cold, at least by Georgia standards here. They closed the schools yesterday because there was there was 1/10 of an inch of ice on the road. So, it's,
Look, man, it is freezing here. I went up to an event for the inauguration. A friend of mine, Caleb, was doing an event, and it is bone chilling cold. And they make you walk blocks. If you get off the train station, you have to walk several blocks to get out of the security zone. So traffic is screwed up. Like walking is, oh man, it was bone chilling cold. There was no snow though. There was no ice. So, but that's anomalous in Georgia, right? That's not normal.
Yeah, I mean, when it's bad, like when it's truly, truly bad, it's like once every 10 years or something. Mm-hmm. Kind of like Dallas, Texas. I mean, Dallas gets a snowstorm once every 10 years or something. So
every blue moon, I feel you.
But I did my graduate work in Colorado, and it's nothing. A foot of snow, people are out driving and everything else. So yeah.
Same thing in New York. When I was in New York, I remember the first time it snowed. I think it was like 4 inches or something. And I'm laying in bed thinking, well, clearly they're gonna, have a snow day. Like clearly these places are gonna shut down. And my ex was like, we don't do that. We don't shut down. Like it just doesn't work that way. You're going to take your ass to work. I was like, damn it. You're out there trudging, making your way in the snow. Mark, Trump is in. He is now the president of the United States. I guess let's start at the very beginning. What's your take so far? I mean, he came out filling out all of these executive orders, one after the next, after the next, after the next. He had a clear idea in mind of what he wanted to do before he got in office. And, look, from my point of view, clearly I'm on the left of the political spectrum, at the very least, the economic left. And I accept it. I just kind of accept it. There are going to be some pretty horrible things from my point of view that Trump is going to do during this term. I just want to stop the wars. If nothing else, I have very low ideas of what I want out of Trump. Has anything bubbled up so far that has hit your economic radar as either being egregious or either being a good idea?
Yeah, maybe I'll take 30 seconds. I think it's important when people are on shows or when you're being interviewed to kind of confess your biases a little bit. I'm kind of on the libertarian side. call myself libertarian light, or like I like to say, I'm recovering libertarian, you know.
Oh, I'm totally
I was not on the Trump train at all in 2016. I didn't vote for him. I couldn't vote for Hillary. So I voted for the pothead, you know. Hey, that's what I did. And then, you know, to paraphrase that classic movie, you know, Dr. Strangelove, you know, how I learned to stop worrying and love the bomb. My evolution with Donald Trump has been how I've learned to stop worrying and love Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Now, do I really love him? I don't know. But when I compare I don't see how you can do worse than the last administration, even on their own leftist stuff. The leftists really didn't like it either. I mean, he didn't execute on anything, and he didn't make very many people happy at all, at least the folks I talked to.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I think has changed a lot is expectations, just kind of like what you were talking earlier about. People realize there's a new sheriff in town and there's going to be some change. Well, one thing I know is I'm not going to like everything Donald Trump does. I can already tell. Some things are going to offend my, you know, libertarian sensibilities, so to speak. I do like the fact that he pardoned the guy from the Silk Road. What's his name?
Ulrich?
Yeah. Because
he had life, right? They gave that guy life in prison.
No, 2 life sentences plus 40 years.
Jesus.
Yeah, I mean,
Jesus.
So, yeah, you know, and it was definitely harsh. You know, I probably would have commuted the sentence or something, but it was a full pardon. Nevertheless, you know, that made libertarian circles happy and stuff like that. What I noticed as a consultant, because I'm out and about, you know, I'm out and about in the Atlanta, you know, greater Atlanta area, and I'm dealing with everybody from Democrats to, you know, politically agnostics to Republicans to libertarians, progressives, all sorts of stuff, you know, people that have businesses, because, you know, I'm a small consulting company, so I don't have clients like CNN, you know, and Coke and stuff like that. You know, I have regional size clients and, you know, small businesses. Yeah. So everybody, even the Democrats, now they would not want me to name them, or they're not going to go on, you know, X and state it, but they're actually happy now that it's over that Harris lost. Because even they were like, okay, it's getting stupid. You know, things are getting stupid. Plus, with the additional information that came out, that campaign was managed so bad. I actually took a whole day and tried to research it and see if any other campaign did anything like that, like paying people to interview them. And, you know,
yeah, that was super weird.
Weird, you know.
Yeah,
and
that was super weird.
Didn't spend very much money. I mean, I think they spent like $300 million.
Yep, $400 million.
Now it looks like they spent
1.5 billion.
Yeah, 1.5 direct.
Yeah,
and that's not including the PAC money.
Nope.
So, you know, and if that's how she's going to manage the country, you know, the way that campaign was managed, it was just, she got no bang for her buck. You know, I was just, you know, I'm trying to decompose it like you are, like everybody else is. Like, how can, these are not stupid people. Let's not, you know, let's not talk and just nonsense. They're not stupid people, but something led them down a stupid road.
Yeah.
You know, why they thought putting Liz Cheney on a pedestal was going to make people just like, you know, one podcaster put it like, you know, Liz's brat didn't really appeal to Gen Z, you know?
Yeah. I mean,
know,
like this is a Democrat, no less, hugging Liz Cheney. Like, that's so weird. It's so bizarre. And they defended her doing that. And it's like, okay, this is ridiculous. Who do you think you're appealing to with Liz Cheney?
Right.
It's the most bizarre thing in the world that they ran with. I'm sorry, Mark, please.
Well, no, and then right afterwards, I wonder if there is like a little master database that they have, and they send the talking points to everyone, because everyone after the election, you know, after they lost, it was like, well, the problem is the left needs a Joe Rogan. The left needs an Elon Musk. And I'm literally pulling my hair out, yelling at the TV. And I'm like, you had a Joe Rogan. You had an Elon Musk. You know, you ran
They were Joe Rogan and it was Elon Musk. Right.
You know,
they were Democrats.
You just need to go on Joe Rogan. You don't need one. You had one, actually. And and that's how I felt. I've always been closer to the Democrats than I have the Republicans. Always. Just because on certain libertarianish civil rights issues, I'm almost absolutist in certain things. And the Democrats used to be the fun party. Now, I don't know. I mean, you got Democrat friends. Now, I forgot where I heard it, but somebody said something like, if you disagree with Republicans by 50%, they generally concentrate on the 50% that you agree with. But if you're with some of these people and you agree on 50%, you're evil because you're 50% polluted,
I mean, think of like what they say about Joe Rogan.
And I don't understand it.
They called Joe Rogan the devil. That was the reason that Kamala Harris didn't even go on the show, because she was like, oh, well, Joe Rogan, he's canceled based on our circles. Okay, Joe Rogan voted for Bernie Sanders. Like how are you, like, it's almost as if they fundamentally misunderstand that people will have all sorts of points of view. And some of those points of view are going to be to the right. Some of those points of view are going to be further to the left. Some are going to be somewhere in between. That's just a person. Like, most people aren't this kind of ideologically contorted where they need to fall in line with everything. So it's like, should trans kids be able to have trans surgeries, or should kids be able to have surgeries where you lop off their body parts? Okay, well, most Americans will say that's outrageous.
And without parental permission.
And without parental permission in some cases. Most parents will say,
it's like, that's insane.
Yeah, that's insane. But a Democrat would say, well, that's racist. That's
why would they pick that hill to die on? I mean, it's not like they figured out, oh, this isn't popular, and they backtrack. They dug in their heels. It's
weird. Or they would say, well, trans women are women. And it's like, no. It's like I get it, man. Like, I don't want to be brutal, right? I have kidney failure. I've ever since I was 17, I had renal failure. Right, my kidneys didn't work. I can't say, well, my kidneys do work, and then have everybody to tell me that my kidneys work.
Right,
and then I die because I don't have kidneys.
There are objective truths in the universe.
Yeah. There are objective truths in the universe.
Not many, but there are some. Yeah,
we're just stuck with it, right? Like, you have an XY chromosome. It is what it is. What it is. You feeling that that's not the case doesn't really make that the case. But for Democrats, they would say, well, that's transphobic. And it's like, you're out of your mind. Most people are not this ideologically wed, where they are down in the I will fight for the trans community through and through. But if you're asking me to go into my mind, and in my mind, I must take a point of view, or otherwise I'm transphobic, I'm going to say, you're out of your mind. And that's what they're dealing with. And so when the American public looks at the party, say, okay, what happened to this party? There's something wrong. They don't see it, though.
Well, right. I would defend to my last breath, if you want to identify as a woman,
yes,
if that's your choice as an adult, I will defend your right to go do that.
Agreed.
Now, if what you're going to say is, I have to agree you're a woman, when I know for a fact you're not,
you lose me.
No, I'm not going to do that. Now, if you want me to call you Jane, I'll do it.
Zero issue with that. Zero issue.
Even if you have a particular pronoun, if I screw it up a couple times and you correct me, then I'll do that. But if you want to get all militant and start acting like you have this entitlement to a non-truth, that's where I part company, because science to me is sacred. And if there's anything I hate about what's been going on in politics, is science has just been decimated in terms of the scientific method. Science, in one word, is skepticism. Everything is skeptical. For instance, gravity is a theory, and it breaks down at the quantum level,
False viability.
Exactly. And if you don't have that, then if you pollute your science with ideology, and then you circumvent the scientific method, which is designed to not allow that, or at least to mitigate it, then you've destroyed science. It's like when Fauci said, I am science. I almost threw something at the TV when I heard. I was watching that live, and I'm like,
did he say that
like,
for real?
WTF? I'm like, what?
Fauci said that for real? I am science?
Yeah, he said that. Check it out on YouTube. You can probably just type it out. Fauci, I am science. He said it.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Because
somebody was criticizing him. Well, some of the science doesn't agree with you. And he goes, I am science.
That's astonishing. That's astonishing. I mean, Fauci was the guy, when they showed the information behind the scenes, and there was a question about whether or not this came out of a lab or whether this came out of a market. And Fauci, without knowing, what was true effectively was like, well, we're not going to say it came out of a lab, it came out of a market. And when people was like, well, wait a minute, we don't know if that's true. Well, all of those people were effectively shouted down. If you remember, for the longest time, you could not say that it came out of a lab.
Yes.
And then there was a report, I believe it was not Popular Mechanics. It was the Atomic Scientists came out. And Atomic Scientists pointed out, we have no idea where this came from. And it's like, okay, so thank you.
Really? No idea at all?
Atomic Scientists pointed out that, this notion that it came out of a wet market, we don't know that as a flat fact. And not as a flat fact, it could very well have come out of a lab. That was the way they explained it. And
it might have come out of a lab that we know for a fact was doing gain-of-function research.
Yes, that Fauci, to his dying day, would not own up to the fact that they were doing. And Rand Paul, Rand Paul ate him alive on this because they were clearly doing gain of function, and Fauci didn't want to own up to the fact that they were doing it. I guess that's my issue with him saying, I am science, because he's trying to make himself unimpeachable, which is nonsense.
Which is anti-science because it's an appeal to authority. It's like on Twitter or X, anything happens. A carbon fiber submarine crashes, and I'm a carpenter, and therefore, everybody seems to want to, tout their credentials, which doesn't mean that much. I mean, how many carbon fiber submarines have you built? Probably zero,
Right.
And it's stuff like that. But what I do see happening is greater business confidence. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm a good bellwether because I don't have Fortune 500 clients. I have clients that have, like, for instance, one of my clients has 35 fast food restaurants. So he's dealing with all of the labor issues. He's dealing with the cost of ingredients, rent increases, things like that. So he's having to deal with that. And business confidence is growing. And I know it because 4 years ago, 80% of my new business was people calling and saying, how high can I raise my prices without losing too much business? That was almost exclusively, that was the phone calls that were coming in, just through referrals and stuff like that. Now we're thinking of expanding, and the bank is looking for a business plan. And can you help us do the ROI analysis and stuff like that?
Interesting.
And so that tells me that from the bottom up, there's a wellspring of, it's almost like a secret memo was sent out to small business saying, now's the time to be entrepreneurial. And so I think the Trump effect, even before he got elected, is true. And I think that has had a positive effect because without small business, that's where most of the jobs are anyway.
Right.
And so I think that's a positive thing. You asked me, is there anything going on that I'm a little concerned about? I don't know, the devil is in the details, but tariffs can be very useful and they can be disastrous, and it's all about the execution. So,
yes, sir.
I do not believe you can fund a country with the welfare state on just tariffs. Mm-hmm. If you want a welfare state, and there's strong arguments for it, you have to tax incomes and you have to tax wealth. Now, here's the question. How do you tax incomes and wealth so that you don't shrink the size of the pie? It doesn't do any good to raise tax rates if the whole pie shrinks and you actually have less tax revenues than you otherwise would have. It's the classic Laffer curve, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's all about the execution. Are there things that we can do from a tariff perspective that would make sense, that are unilateral, that we're just going to say as a matter of national policy, we're going to have this group of countries, we're going to have not perfect, but we're going to have strong free trade with, and these countries we're not going to have so much. And these countries we're not going to trade with at all. That could be sensible. Also, what products are you going to tax? If you tax, I don't want to get technical because everybody listening isn't an economist, but if you put tariffs on goods that have to be imported, meaning they're not even made here, that are inelastic, meaning people are going to buy them pretty much regardless of their price.
Like toilet paper.
Or insulin.
Or insulin, yeah.
You know, something that people just are going to buy, at least in the short term, they're going to buy regardless. Gasoline, natural gas. I mean, when it's cold, you're going to pay $200, you know, for your electric or gas bill, as opposed to $100, because you don't want to freeze to death. Now, later you can retool, you can change from this to that, but in the short term, any tariff on a highly inelastic good is essentially a tax on the domestic citizens. And I'm not sure that's the heart of what the Trump administration is trying to do. My impression of what Trump has done is he's destroyed the Republican Party and turned it from a conservative party into a larger tent populist party. Let's call it national populist. Populism with some patriotism, you know, in it.
Yeah.
Ironically, I'm going to get hate mail if I don't choose my words correctly. Not as far, but similar to what Russia is. Russia is a highly patriotic society, and they don't like being criticized by other countries. Americans don't like being criticized, you know, by other countries. And so I think the populism that is growing up is a good thing. I think that there's talk about the working class. And I'll just tell you right now, as a capitalist, if you let capitalism get to the point where all you have is a Gini coefficient of near zero, you're not going to have capitalism very long. You're not even going to have a government very long.
Yeah.
On the other side of the coin, if you make it so egalitarian that you've quenched out all forms of merit, all differentiation with regards to merit,
not gonna have a country either.
No, you're not going to have. You're going to have a stagnant country that the rule of thumb is we're going to have tomorrow what we had today. It's going to be a stagnant economy, and like, you know, I'm very much an Aristotelian. I believe in balance in most things. You know, very few things do you want unlimited quantities of, even courage. I mean, if you have too much courage, you know, you're reckless, right?
Yeah.
You know? If you have too much generosity, you're homeless. I mean, there's a balance in life, and I hope that the administration remembers that. But right now, based on what I've seen and what I've consumed and what I've seen them doing, I'm bullish, and I feel good about most of the things that I see coming out. I'm a little concerned about the Middle East. One of the reasons I voted, it wasn't like my only issue. One of the reasons I voted for Trump was I want both these wars to just stop.
Agreed.
I want them to stop.
Agreed.
And the only way to do that I can tell, that I can see, if I was president, I would make it clear to Ukraine and Russia, this ends now. Take your borders, take what you got, walk away. And I would tell Israel, okay, you've made your point. Stop it. And if you don't stop it, there will be a high price to pay.
Yeah.
And here's the difference. If Trump says that, they're going to believe him. Nobody respected Biden. Let's just call it what it is. I didn't respect him. You didn't respect him. And certainly foreign leaders didn't respect him. Trump, even the people that hate him, respect him. What's their names? Joe Scarborough and Mika did a holy pilgrimage to Florida to kiss the ring after literally calling him Hitler for never how many years. So, and that's been going on and on again. Did you catch it was just out last night. Did you catch some journalists caught Larry Finkel from BlackRock?
No, I haven't seen this one.
He had his two goons with him, and the goons were like elbowing, trying to, they weren't assaulting journalists, but they were being, Larry Finkel pulls his phone out, takes a snapshot of their face. Journalists are like, are you trying to intimidate me? Are you Are you threatening to kill me? Like maybe you did Donald Trump, you know, and what I took away from that is I think that's the first time that guy has ever had to deal with unscripted questions.
Yeah.
Because they followed him. He had to walk a long way. You know, it's Switzerland. You've been to Switzerland, right? And he walked a long way to the Hard Rock Cafe, and they followed him, and he would go across the street and come back across the street trying to dodge them, and they just stood there and asked him. I bet they asked him 40 questions. And
he
it
didn't
became
want
clear he was angry that they would even
have the temerity to question him about.
Yes, exactly. Or even be in his presence or something. And he was, I mean, I had seen him in interviews before, and I never really liked him that much before. But after that video, it's not flattering at all. I mean, at all. Try to go watch that.
I would check that out.
I'll send you a link.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
When we're done.
That's amazing.
So I think things are going to be better. That's one thing I'm 99.9% confident things are going to be better. I think they're going to be better on the international front. I think one thing I do like about Trump is I do think he gets that war is costly.
He said that.
And I think he wants to avoid it if he at all possibly can. I think he's going to get, you know, if you look at Trump's history, he likes to talk a lot of smack. And then he moderates his
he backs away.
What he actually wants to do after he digs into it and gets more information. It's like the declassifying,
JFK files.
Yeah, the JFK. You know, he said he would do it within 5 minutes after he takes office. Well, now he's saying, well, you know, it's proven to be a little more difficult. And I get that. Sometimes you get in and things become a little more complicated.
Mark, he was already president. He was already president. And he promised
he has been known for fulfilling his campaign promises. So I think he will do it. What my point is, he likes to stir up stuff. He likes to talk smack, and then he moderates a little bit. So he got elected because of really, in my view, three things: the border, inflation, and wokeness. And let's be more specific, unbridled wokeness, because some of the so-called woke stuff I actually agree with.
Yeah.
But it was so overshadowed by the insanity, nobody even gives it any, you know, it's just that word is tarnished forever. It's just nobody, it's suddenly funny on January 21st, there was like 80% less woke people. You know, it's just bizarre. Corporation after corporation. Georgia Tech got rid of it. Reinhardt University got rid of it. It changed everything. It's amazing what happens when you win. It's just amazing to me. It just absolutely amazes me how the entire game changes once you win.
Yeah.
And Trump came in, and you have to give him credit. He didn't just win. It's the biggest political comeback in. I mean, I think you have to go back to Napoleon, who was exiled on the Isle of Patmos, and he came back and did it again. You know, I'm not familiar with anything quite like that and they threw everything at him. I mean, everything. The deep state went at him.
Shot him.
They
literally shot him. Yeah,
they did lawfare on him. Lawsuits. New York went back and changed the statute of limitations so that freak that sued him for not sexual assault, but whatever it was called.
I know what you mean.
Pushing her against a wall. You know, and she even said, no, he didn't rape me. He didn't touch me. He was just creepy. And then she started talking about how she was going to spend her money and all that kind of stuff. I mean, they threw everything at him that they possibly could. They impeached him twice. I mean, normal people would be dead in the water, but you got to give the guy credit. He just stood in there and punched and punched and punched and punched back. And I think people respect that. Now, some people might find that frightening, but nevertheless, I think you respect it. I think our our allies and enemies overseas respected. I think everybody sees there's a new sheriff in town. And right now I'm bullish. I think Trump wants to think about one thing primarily, the economy. It's the economy, stupid.
Mark.
And whether you want to admit it or not, the most fragile people of our society are impacted very negatively by unbridled immigration, or let's say unbridled illegal immigration. Even the H-1B thing that got all nasty for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, if you are a dishwasher and that's what you do, if you know it's a lower skilled job, if you let millions of unskilled people in, it's just supply and demand, right? Just the law of supply and demand. That's going to lower
the wages,
the worth that you are to a potential employer. If you pass minimum wage laws, there's just going to be a technical rate of substitution from labor into capital, and that hurts workers as well. And so I do think, here's what I'm saying. I hope Trump, now that he's elected, he can't run again, doesn't forget that he won in part because of his populist message. And if he doesn't forget that, I think he'll go down as a great president. Because what he's doing right now is smart. I like the fact that he's going to drill and have, open that up. Everything we do in our world involves petroleum. Even if you are so green, you think you're exempt from it, you're not. The food you eat uses petroleum. The containers that you put your food in uses petroleum.
Yeah.
The pharmaceuticals that you use petroleum. Everything uses petroleum. And guess what? The United States is literally blessed or fortunate, depending on how you view your words. We have the largest known reserves of natural gas and fossil fuels in the whole world. And if you throw in Canada and Mexico, North America is
rich.
Very rich in that. And now that we've been able to think it out, electric cars aren't that green if you're just going to, charge the batteries up with coal burning, plants or gas burning plants and all that kind of a thing.
Mark, I'm going to have to close this because I have another guess, but sure. I would say from your mouth to God's ears. I don't know if I'm going to say I'm bullish. My expectations have been deadened to such a degree that I have two objectives: stop the wars. Those are my main two. It's like stop the wars. I have accepted that I am not going to be a fan of this. Meaning anything that happens that I like is gravy on top. So I'll say it that way. My man, thank you for this, Mark.
Always a pleasure, my friend.
Man. Thank you for this. Mark Frost. He's an economist, professor, consultant, drummer, Eagle Scout, Marine capitalist, Schumpeterian, a recovering libertarian. You can follow Mark on Twitter at FrostyCash. Definitely check him out. Yes, trends to the right, but sane. Very sane. And I appreciate that. Thank you, Mark. I always appreciate you, man. Thank you for this.
Always.
All right. I would like to bring in my next guest. Richard hasn't been on the show for a while, so it's good to have him back. I'm going to wait till he pops in there we are. Now I'm going to bring him in. Richard Solomon. Richard Solomon is an author of The Tao Guide to Navigating Satanic Matrix, unquote, a political philosophical commentator and writer. And you can check him out at, I always get this word wrong, taonow.org for more data in order to download a free copy of his book. Richard, man, thank you for this. I apologize for the delay. I tried to let you guess. And I hate, I'll tell you this way. I had a guest on Kofi. Kofi came onto the show. Kofi was in the middle of speaking. And I was like, Kofi, I need to cut this in half because I have another guest. And the audience was like, boo. Oh, why did you let Kofi finish his talk? It's like, okay, fair enough. It was rude to the guests. So I try to avoid it. I try to let the guests finish. And that includes you, by the way. Meaning I would also do the same for you. But thank you for joining me, man. How you doing? You doing all right this morning?
Oh, I'm doing good. Thank you. Yourself?
I am doing well. I am doing well. That is a hell of a title. When you first sent me that book and when you first sent me the title, I was like, all right, Satanic Matrix. You got to explain that. What is that book? Let's start there.
Absolutely. Let me just repeat the title. It's the Tao Guidebook to Navigating the Satanic Matrix. And just to clarify the website, you could go to the website and download a free copy. The website is taoisnow.org. That's TAOISNOW.org. Tao with a T, TAOISNOW.org, taoisnow.org.
Okay.
So to explain the book, let me first try to define the Satanic Matrix. What is that? And it starts with, there was a French philosopher named Jean Baudrillard. He wrote a book called Simulacra and Simulation. The movie The Matrix is loosely based on that philosophy. And you actually see the book in the first, they show the book.
Very, like radically loosely based on that book.
Right. Actually, Baudrillard saw the movie and he said it was a stimulation of a movie about the Matrix. So,
right.
Or a simulation of something. So anyway, the point being that the basic premise is with technology, we are living in a simulation. Granted, it's reality. We live in a physical universe, but there is a simulation component. And look what's happening with technology. We have fake AI video. When you go online and you get an argument, back and forth, you could be arguing with an AI bot. So with these, was it an organic event or a false flag? Is that person real or is he controlled opposition? What Baudrillard stated is, as we go through this end stage empire, which we're in, system, and with this advancement in technology, the most difficult thing will be discerning the real from the unreal. And we've gotten technology to a point where they could have a computer simulation as president. How would you ever know, right? I mean, you wouldn't know. So to get through all this and fake news and the corporate media, you're constantly being bombarded with, propaganda, psyops. And so it's what I would call cognitive warfare. And so to combat this, the Tao has useful techniques and tactics and strategies to help you navigate, provide you with a GPS. So in an airplane, when you're in a commercial jet, when it's cloudy and they can't see, it's at night, you need a GPS. And so we're entering a world where everything we see before us is becoming an illusion, and what in Hindu scripture called Maya, the world of illusion. And so to navigate this simulation, I believe the Tao provides a good methodology. And let me demonstrate in the real world.
Please.
So we have this, election, right? And we choose between candidate A and candidate B. And so we have this simulation of choice, but who really controls the United States? If you look at it, it's an oligarchy, it's corporations, it's the military industrial complex, BlackRock, global finance. And so if you look at the decisions that are being made, the Zionist lobby, I would say, that's definitely has a big role based on what we've seen over the last, over the last year or so. And so these entities have converged together, and I would say the brain of this is finance, because we live in a capitalist world. So whoever has the power to generate money, whoever could press a button and create money, kind of runs things, and then all these forces are those are the branches. So you have what we call the deep state now, but the security state, the permanent state. And so we have this election. Trump won, right? But I would argue that Trump was picked. He was chosen
by this permanent state, this oligarchy. I don't think we've had a president who's made really independent decisions since JFK, and he rocked the apple cart, and look what happened. So let's look at this. So we have this oligarchy, and I would divide. We could call it the three branches of government, of U.S. government. We used to think of it as the executive, legislative, and judicial.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say right now the oligarchy is divided into three parts: war with China, war with Russia, war with Iran. That's really, and I would say it's a Zionist-oriented oligarchy or Zionist lobby, but not completely, but I would say that plays a role. And so we see Trump win. So we have optics. What is Biden represented war with Russia, right?
Mm-hmm.
With Ukraine. So Trump, I think from his just from an optics perspective, he represents war with Iran and China. And given the fact, I believe that the oligarchy put Trump in place because that's where we're headed. I mean, I'm not saying we're totally exiting Ukraine, but I think we're going to start to focus more of our military resources and direct them towards Iran and China. And now remember, Iran supplies a lot of China's energy, oil. So by hitting Iran, and I'm not saying we're going to necessarily go full hot war, but it's going to be, proxy wars, covert wars. What we saw with Trump's previous administration, they assassinated Iran's top general.
Right, Soleimani.
And so you might see Trump during Trump's administration, he didn't start any new wars, but he kept all the old wars going. And I think he didn't get out of Afghanistan. He didn't get out of Syria. He didn't really stop what was taking place, the CIA's covert war with Ukraine, the build up there. So all the wars kept going under Trump. There was no pulling out of anything. They just kept everything, continuing. But under Biden, obviously, then they brought in, they ramped it up with Ukraine. And so Trump may just keep things going, trying, building, and then they may do something else. The point being, the resources are going to be more directed towards Iran and China under Trump, just because the optics state that.
But how? Okay, so I would agree with you. I would agree with you on some of that.
Okay.
I do think for Donald Trump's case, he did set the context to pull out of Afghanistan, and he did put a knife in Obama's, CIA program to overthrow the Syrian government, or at the very least he tried to, even though he stole the oil. It's like, I'm keeping the oil, meaning it's not that Trump is anti-war. I don't take that, or I don't believe that. I think of all the political participants who are, political actors, he seems to be more open to make a deal in order to end the conflict. Like, for example, his entire political rhetoric during the campaign was, these wars aren't doing anything for us. I'm sick of these wars. We're spending all of this money. We're not getting anything out of it. And speaks very candidly about not wanting to initiate additional wars. Now, I could be wrong in this. Trump could have been lying and using that purely as political rhetoric. But he seemed to have taken this stance that, I don't want to have wars. I want to end those wars. I want to be known as the one that end those wars. Now, you might be right about Iran. It does seem like he wants to have a pressure campaign against Iran, or at the very least, the goblins, the creatures that he put into his administration have a hard on for going against Iran, or for that matter, going against China. But they have to know that that's not a war you can win with China. And I'm very skeptical you can even win it against Iran. You can do it a lot of damage. But the reality of it is, Iran is 3 times the size of Iraq. And we didn't have enough to basically manage, to be able to completely hold Iraq. I mean, it fell to ISIS, Daesh, and all these other groups. I mean, I guess those are the same. I guess my thing is, look, I agree with you that there are many prongs of the U.S. that are interested in either escalating the conflict with Russia, even though they've lost, or escalating the conflict with China, using Taiwan as a battering ram to do it. Those seem to be more along the lines of the Democratic Party, though. Like, they seem to be more warlike, weirdly enough, than, let's say, Trump, his own framing of the world in regards to what he wants versus what he doesn't want, or the direction he doesn't necessarily want to go. I agree with you. He murdered Soleimani. That could have that could have started a war by itself. And yet he pulled back at the last minute. I mean, I guess I have a different question for you on this. I have always asked this question of where's the floor? How do you decide where the floor is? And I've asked people this because, you have all sorts of people with all sorts of different points of view in the way that they look at the world. How does this, because when I read this, I get the sense from you that this is like navigating our world, navigating all of the propaganda that infects our world, navigating all of the things that people effectively want you to believe because they, for various reasons. How does Taoism help you find the floor, help you find what's real, what's legitimate in this kind of world where all of these things are thrown at you at once, and all of these people and all of these groups are trying to grab your point of view and to bringing it into line with theirs? I hope that question makes sense.
It does. I understand. The way to navigate this is to have a code. In other words, you have to have a set of principles or an ethical foundation that you believe in. So, and then by having a code, you could develop programs to deal with that, but you need a solid foundation. So in Tao, there's many foundational tenets, one being defense of the orphan and widow. You could judge a nation a lot by the way they treat their children and elderly. And if you look at the United States empire, it treats kids really bad. It sets up, it's impoverishing them. It's destroying the educational system. Yeah. It's designed to lead a lot of the kids on a fast track to the prison industrial complex, which is for profit. And then look at, as the elderly, they're trying to, take away Medicare, Social Security. So let me get, if you defend the orphan and the widow, then you defend the laborer, because the laborer, he grows the rice, he feeds the orphan and widow. So you defend labor, the working man. Mm-hmm. And, there's just a natural chain of events. You defend, then you support the warrior who defends the society or the nation state that protects the orphan and widow, the laborer, and then obviously the emperor, and I'm using that as a generic or term, the government that defends the orphan widow, the working man, has a constitutional defense system, and then if he protects all that, then he's worthy of supporting. I would argue that we do not have any American leadership that defends women and kids, defends the working people. Let's look at this. Now let's talk about a simulation. We're going back to the Matrix. Okay, so we have Elon Musk and this guy, Vivek Ramaswamy. They're this DOGE program. And what is that? That's a simulation of Ronald Reagan's trickle-down economics. We're going to clean up all the waste. We're going to deregulate corporations and banks because we know business, business knows how to run things. It'll all trickle down. We'll all get wealth. What they're going to clean up are things like food safety inspections, airline safety, Medicare, Social Security, food stamps. That's what's going to be cleaned up off the table in this simulation. Make America great again. Redux. But what they're not going to cut is the Pentagon budget, the security state, the corporate welfare, the banker welfare. None of that is going to be cut. All this is, whatever they call it, it is an upward transfer of wealth.
Yes.
And we have, whether it's Obama, whether it's Biden, whether it's Trump, this transfer of wealth to the 1%, to the oligarchy is not going to stop. This pipeline is going, and they can present whatever optics they want, but that's not stopping. And part of this, keeping this oligarchy fed, relies on war. And that's why, I disagree. Trump didn't pull out of anything. He dropped, remember the mother of all bombs? He dropped on Afghanistan. He assassinated Iranian leaders. He took over the oil fields in Syria. He did nothing to alleviate the wars. He just maintained the status quo. And then Biden came in. Maybe it's like a good cop, bad cop thing they do. What I'm saying is Trump and Biden are owned by the same entities.
Oh, yeah.
And this is an illusion that you have freedom of choice, that you are in the matrix. There is no choice. They did a study, I think it was I forget the university.
Princeton.
The effect, it was Princeton, where the effect of people, what the people actually want and the policy. And we have no bearing whatsoever on what policies are going to be imposed. We have no say in what wars are going to be fought, any of this stuff. This is all being decided, and they let us play this A-B game, of false choice. So we believe in this illusion that we live in a democracy. The fact is, the democratic institutions have been gutted. Free speech, your constitutional rights, you could be tortured. That was the whole thing in, after 9/11, Guantanamo Bay, all those, they stripped all those laws where you could be held indefinitely, habeas corpus. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights has been stripped. You live in a dictatorship, but you think you live in a democracy because you have this false choice. Now, one day they're going to take away the false choice, because when people are just going to, realize it's a sham. There's a I think the quote by Frank Zappa, when it becomes too expensive to maintain this, and they're going to pull back the curtain at the back of the theater, and you're going to just see a brick wall. And one day they're going to pull it back, and you're going to realize this is a brick wall. But now that it's still worth it for them to invest all this money in these spectacle elections. Election day starts, the whole election campaign starts almost immediately. We have these election cycles of spectacle. This is the Roman Empire. This is a high-tech Roman Empire. This is spectacle. This is bread and circuses, but more circuses than bread. And this is where we're at. And it's a declining empire. And that's why they're pushing these wars so hard. It's an empire in decline. They've gutted the heart of the United States. They've hollowed it out when they outsourced all the manufacturing to China, when they destroyed the high-paying jobs, and now they're doing it on the white-collar level. You see, bringing in the tech workers from other countries. They're basically trying to lower wages and and hollow the country out. So we have this financialized oligarchy that's profiting, but at the expense of the actual infrastructure of the empire. And that you could literally bridges, roads, schools, all that stuff. It's gonna crumble, and that's eventually you hollow it out so much. All they have is a security state, a Praetorian Guard, a military to keep it going, and that's kind of where we're at, and where it's going to go even further. And look at the technology with robot dogs, all the surveillance. I mean, they're AI drones. They've got to lock down tight.
Yeah, the AI stuff is terrifying. Richard, I agree with you on this, man. I mean, well, at the very least, I agree with you on that part, that it seems to be getting worse, especially in the security aspect of this. Richard, man, I'm going to have to bring you back, man. Thank you for this. I really appreciate your take. And the audience, I'm going to give your byline, and I'm going to let people know where they can find you. Richard Solomon, he's author of the Tao Guidebook to Navigating the Satanic Matrix and a Political Philosophy. I'm sorry. Oh, political philosopher. Okay, a political philosophical. That's what I'm getting. A political philosophical commentator and writer. You can check him out at taoisnow.org, and more data. You can download the free book at the location. Richard, man, thank you for this. I appreciate it. I'm going to have you back.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Be safe, man. And I would like to get to the man of the hour, Daniel McAdams. Daniel McAdams is executive director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Welcome to the show, man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm doing good, Jamal. You're looking snappy right now.
Well, thank you.
Just saying. I'm tired. I got up early, but you're looking good, man.
Man, you talking about dragging ass this morning like nobody's business. I was sitting here like guzzling my coffee, trying to get a little energy boost. It's okay. No, man, I'm happy to talk to you. I'm happy to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
I want to get into, well, first, before we get into executive orders, I have to get into to your take on this. So, Donald Trump removed the security clearances for the 51 intelligence officials. John Bolton was in that list, and apparently John Bolton got woke up at like 12:01 and told that his security detail was being revoked by Donald Trump. This is Trump talking about Bolton, and I want to get your take on this. I laughed my ass off at this, to be honest.
John Bolton's security clearance, sir.
Because I think that was enough time. It's we take a job. You take a job. You want to do a job. We're not going to have security on people for the rest of their lives. Why should we? I thought he was a very dumb person, but I used him well, because every time people saw me come into a meeting with John Bolton standing behind me, they thought that he'd attack them because he was a warmonger. He's the one that got us involved, along with Cheney and a couple of others, convinced Bush, which was a terrible decision, to blow up the Middle East. We blew up the Middle East and we left. We got nothing out of it except a lot of death. We killed a lot of people. And John Bolton was, one of those guys, a stupid guy. But no, you can't have that for life. You shouldn't expect it for life. Right.
He's a stupid guy. And he used to walk in with him in a meeting like he was a chained animal or something. And he used to freak people out when John Bolton was there with him. Like John Bolton was like some kind of rabid animal. Give me your take on the security clearances thing. I mean, because there is a question of why do people keep security clearances for so long after they get out of government? Give me your take on this. Well, for one, on John Bolton in general and Trump's comments on John Bolton, but on also removing the security clearances of the 51 intelligence officials that effectively lied about the Hunter Biden laptop. Give me your thoughts.
Well, he did hire Bolton. We have to say that.
Yes, he did.
Hired him. He listened to people. He listened to the wrong people, probably. And he's probably saying that he's dumb now and all that because he's embarrassed probably that he hired someone so bad. Anyone who had been paying attention to John Bolton and all the neocons' careers understand that everything that they ever say, every one of their policy prescriptions turns out wrong. It turns out bad. They promise the world. It turns out to be garbage. And it just goes on over and over again. Has he learned his lesson? I hope so. He has some picks in. I mean, his current national security advisor is not much better than John Bolton, I have to say, if you listen to what Walt says. The guy is very, very ill-informed. We can get into it later if you want. But so I think he's learned some of his lessons, but not all of it. Now, in terms of the security clearances, I think some people may view it as being vindictive. These are the guys, after all, the 51 who signed this letter saying that the laptop was Russian disinformation. Right. They're also the ones who, throughout his presidency, would invoke their intelligence background to cast aspersions on anything that Trump is doing. Oh, this sounds like he's mouthing Putin's words, and especially people like John Brennan. He did it for 4 years. So it might look vindictive, and perhaps there is an element of revenge, which is probably deserved. But in practical terms, removing security clearances has enormous impact on these individuals, and it hits them right in the pocketbook, because your security clearance in Washington is your stock and trade. That is your entry pass into well-paid jobs. That's why people will do anything to keep their security clearances, because you go over to Raytheon or any of these millions of military industrial complex companies, and there is a section for people who have clearances, particularly the high ones that they have, and for uncleared people. If you're cleared, man, you got the gravy train. So these guys are on the gravy train. They've been on the gravy train for decades. And I mean, I love seeing it, because Trump just came in and said, nope, no more gravy train for you guys. No more kibbles, baby.
But why do they keep so explain the security clearance thing to me. So let's say I work in government. Let's say I'm John Bolton. I work in government. I'm a lunatic. And I get out of government job and I get a job at Raytheon. How is my security clearance being used at a company like Raytheon or Cyberdyne or any of these other, Lockheed Martin, for any of these, for lack of a better word? How is that clearance used at those companies?
Well, one of the things that's happened over the past several decades is that the intelligence community and the military industrial, and the Pentagon, has outsourced an enormous amount of things that they used to do in-house. And there's a lot of people who are a lot smarter than I am have written a lot about this and how this is a real problem. We've outsourced intelligence, we've outsourced analysis, we've outsourced tons and tons of things. Now, I'm an anarchist, I'm a no government guy, but I think outsourcing to the private sector is much worse. If it's something, for example, like national defense, that should be federal.
Agreed.
Full stop. So what they've done is they've outsourced it and created enormously well-paid jobs. But the problem is you're doing sensitive things. You're doing classified things. So they have to have civilians who could come in there that have the requisite clearances to do those jobs that had once been done in-house. And so that's the problem. You have to have those clearances to do those jobs. So that's the problem.
So, oh wow. So companies like Raytheon, for example, are doing classified work. And because they're doing classified work, it takes various people with various classifications to even see what's happening. Basically, in order for you to even do this work, to do this job, you need to have X, Y, Z clearance because the information you're dealing with is going to be so sensitive. Wow, that is amazing. Because what that means is stuff that's federal secrets are now being privatized to people in private corporations. That's so weird to me. Because I agree with you. To me, that's just clearly a federal issue. Like if you're talking about national security, it's not about profit. It's about how do we keep the nation safe. That's not the same thing as how can we maximize our profit with a security clearance at some kind of private company that is seeking to, make more and more money. That's super weird to me.
Yeah, if you think about it in practical terms, right now, my guess is what Raytheon is doing as we speak is desperately trying to make hypersonic missiles. The Russians have shown themselves, and to a degree, the Chinese and even the Iranians perhaps, have shown themselves to be miles ahead of the U.S., at least from what we can see in the open in terms of hypersonic technology. So if you're a civilian and you're working on creating hypersonic missiles, well, the government has to have that protection of having you with a non-disclosure agreement. You can't just go, it's not like sort of take your lunchbox and go to work. You're working on stuff that, the Chinese would pay for, anyone would pay for, and they can't get out. So that's why they have to do it.
Oh, that's super interesting. Wow. So yeah, they have lost their security clearances, all 51 of them. It is a little bit vindictive, but fair enough. I accept the vindictiveness. I mean, they pulled a massive psyop on the American public, something they clearly knew was not true. That the FBI knew was not true, that these guys came out and was like, yeah, this is 51 intelligence officials believe that this was Russian disinformation. Joe Biden said it on a debate stage in order to combat the fact that Trump pointed out that there was all sorts of corruption in the laptop. These guys put their names on the list because of Blinken organizing them to come out in order to contest the fact that Trump was going to bring that up. So, if it's a bit vindictive, fair enough. On some level, it's earned. You've lied to the American public en masse. God bless. This doesn't bother me. This doesn't bother me. And part of me feels like it's fully and completely deserved. Let's get to his executive orders. Just on a basic, before I even go to the executive orders, there's one more thing I want to get to first. Donald Trump gave an ultimatum to Vladimir Putin. And I saw this and was like, what the hell? Because two things seem to be happening at once. In one case, Donald Trump will be conciliatory. He would say NATO expansion was always a red line. It was understood to be so. It was stupid to push NATO to that point. And then he would put this out on Truth Social. I'm not looking to hurt Russia. I love the Russian people and always had a very good relationship with President Putin. And this, despite the radical left's Russia hoax, we must never forget that Russia helped us win the Second World War, losing almost 60 million lives in the process. Okay, that is stupid. It's the other way around. We helped Russia win that war. They expended like 40 million people to win that war. It's like 90% of the Germans that were killed on the Eastern Front. So Trump may not know that, but let's keep going. And so all this being said, I'm going to do Russia, whose economy is failing. It's not, by the way, they leapfrog Germany, but okay, fair enough. Let's keep going. President Putin is a very big favor. Settle now and stop this ridiculous war. It's only going to get worse if we don't make a deal. And soon I have no other choice but to put high levels of taxes, tariffs, and sanctions on anything being sold in Russia to the United States and various other participating countries. Let's get this war, which never should have started, if I was president, over with. We can do it the easy way or we can do it the hard way. And the easy way is always better. It's time to make a deal. No more lives should be lost. This is so ludicrous to me, but I want to get your take on this. What do you think is going on here? Is this a push and pull? Is this, I'm going to be hard and conciliatory and we find some way to come to a deal? What's going on with this? Give me your take.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, and I'm going to not use the word that I really want to use, but you're getting your butt kicked in a bar. You picked a fight and you're getting your butt kicked, and you tell the other guy, okay, now you got it. You can do it the easy way or the hard way. You can give up now if you want. You should give up. You really should. I think it's intended to sound like a tough guy, and to many Americans, maybe it does because they're terribly informed when it comes to Russia. But to people, I think who follow it closely, it sort of smacks of desperation. It's objectively true. And I think in another statement a couple of days ago, he said that Russia has lost 1 million people. Well,
I even have that clip. And it's like, dude, where are you getting that from? Like, where are you getting this information?
If that was the case, we wouldn't be. I mean, why are we seeing the press gangs in Ukraine grabbing people off the streets? If it was happening in Russia, we'd be seeing it. Exactly. And it's just not. It's like those elusive North Korean soldiers. Where are they, man? I haven't seen any. So
they're there. Those soldiers burning their faces just before they die. It's like they're on the deathbed. It's like, I will leave no answers.
Yeah, it's like So I mean, in a way, it sounds like desperation. It's a little bit funny for those of us that follow it, but when I get more serious, it's a little bit concerning. But it tells me that he has no one around him who's telling him what's actually happening with regard to Russia. The idea that a Russia that has withstood sanctions for not only the past 4 years of Biden, but of course many years before that, I mean, they've literally sanctioned everything that moves. He says, I'm going to sanction anything that comes in here from Russia. Well, last time I was in a grocery store or in any store, I haven't seen anything made from Russia. There's no Russian cars going around. There's no, so there's really nothing left to sanction. I really worry that he's not getting good information, and I think Waltz is absolutely clueless when it comes to Russia. And I really hope that a layer beneath Waltz, and I don't remember, I don't know who the guys are, gals are, but I hope there is someone there somewhere who knows what's going on that can get the president's ear, because this is dangerous. It's bad, it's embarrassing, but it's also dangerous.
Yeah, I think he's terribly misinformed, which is wild to me because, like I said, he would come out and say NATO expansion was a problem. NATO expansion was always a red line. NATO expansion shouldn't have happened. And then I hear that and I'm like, okay, yeah, that's good. That's right. He said it sounds like he's setting a context on which to negotiate and talk. And so I'm like, okay, great. And then he comes up with this nonsense. It's like, okay, what the hell is what is this tough guy thing that he's now trying to pull? It's like, go make a deal. Like you said, call it Joe Biden's fault, make the deal, get this over with. I want to go to his executive orders. For better or for worse, I will give credit to Trump on this. He came in with a plan. He had a clear idea on some level on what he wanted to do. And it's almost like he looked at Joe Biden's presidency as a kind of an interruption to his own. So the first thing was like, all right, I'm going to get rid of all of the executive orders that Joe Biden passed, and I'm going to pass the ones that I want to pass on all of these various issues. So there were plenty on immigration. He promised mass deportations, had to necessarily detail how he would implement those deportations. He declares a national emergency at the Mexico border. There's another one, Remain in Mexico policy. He reinstated the Remain in Mexico policy, which ended a program of releasing asylum seekers into the U.S. Birthright citizenship, basically an executive order on that. From your take, I mean, just looking at these executive orders, did any stand out to you, either as egregious or either as good?
Well, the first thing, I think it's pretty remarkable. These guys must have been busy little beavers these past few days, because there are some very well-written executive orders in there, and I've not read them all. There's a lot of them. My favorite ones are the ones that are rescinding previous executive orders. Just like my favorite thing Congress could do would be to unpass a bunch of laws, because there's a lot of bad ones on there. But, a president, I think it was Milton Friedman wrote about this, a president has about 50 days to really get things done before inertia sets in. and the sort of the deep state or whatever, the usual cycle, different competing special interests will kick in and get everything sort of back to the status quo. So you have a very short window of time where you can enact radical change. And so I think that he understood this. And even the ones I don't agree with necessarily, I'm impressed by how rapidly he passed a lot of these things. There are some symbolic ones, no flag but the American flag hanging out at embassies. And I think that's good. I mean, that's normal. Getting rid of government DEI programs is great because it hurts a lot of people. Even people it's supposed to benefit. It casts, questions about people, and it shouldn't do that. I think the one about suspending foreign development aid, at first I was sort of not that impressed, because you just simply reclassify things and it doesn't affect military aid, which is where the majority of our damage is done. Right. And I don't have the quote in front of me, and it wasn't myself who discovered it, but someone else discovered the language in this executive order is actually quite fascinating. And that first point, and I wish I had it in front of me, but I don't. But essentially what it does is it makes the point that U.S. aid to foreign countries hurts those countries. And that's interesting. I wish I had the wording, but it hurts those countries. It causes disorder in those countries. And it really, I mean, if you read it, for me, I looked at it and said, I would literally write that sentence, as a non-interventionist, because we think we're helping them, but what we're doing is we're subverting order in those countries. And I would encourage your listeners to have a look at that one, because if that's going to be a guiding principle in Trump's foreign policy, and I doubt it will be in an overarching way, but that would be a terrific guiding principle.
I'm curious, does that, from my understanding, because I saw the exact quote that you were talking about.
Okay.
Did that also mean, though, that Ukraine is no longer getting funding for the time being? I wasn't sure if it meant that. Like, for some reason, when I saw that quote, for some reason, I associated with Ukraine, and that Zelensky was not going to be getting a payday going further, at least for the time being. But maybe I'm wrong on this. Maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah, I don't know. What I've read is that shipments have been drastically reduced and halted, right. And if that's the case, that's good. I actually didn't think Ukraine. I thought Iran, but I thought also Venezuela, places where the U.S. and Trump 1.0 did stupid things, like trying to overthrow the Maduro government in Venezuela, which was an absolute disaster. So all this money that's wasted, and Georgia, all this money we're putting into overthrowing the Georgia Dream Party. Slovakia, you can imagine there's probably some color revolution. And actually, Fico himself said, the prime minister of Slovakia said, they're brewing a color revolution here. So you think about those countries, if that's the case, and Trump says we don't want to do this stuff, no more color revolutions, man, that would be fantastic. I would have a hard time believing that, but wow, that would be a real achievement.
But see, for him, those people are nationalists. Like when he's Fico is a lefty, but when he's thinking of like Orban, when he's thinking of Karl Kogetsku, like he's thinking in terms of, okay, well, you're subverting the nationalists from getting in office. And if he considers himself a nationalist, he may see kinsmanship with those particular governments, meaning he can work with Fico, he can work with Orban, he can work with Karl Kogetsku, in regards to them having a similar framing of, I don't want to be involved in these wars. Why are we involved in these wars? And that's not necessarily something that he's going to get if they're overthrowing the Georgian government or if they're overthrowing the Slovakian government. So maybe, I mean, you could be perfectly right on this. From his point of view, this money is just going to change.
You burst my bubble, man. I was being optimistic for once. I'm sure you're probably right. It's all politics, but good.
Well, I don't know. I'm not trying to burst your bubble. I guess I'm saying you might be right in this. Like from Trump's point of view, we are putting money into overthrowing governments and governments that I can work with. Yeah. And so, no, I don't want to put all of this money into Georgia if you're going to overthrow the Georgian government. And the Georgian government that was in prior was going to be anti-war, meaning they weren't going to be on board for this kind of Russian war stuff, or for that matter, getting rid of Fico when Fico would be an anti-war government. Like, I guess my thing is, you could be perfectly right on this, that is exactly the framing of it. And that's exactly his thinking of it, of I don't see the point in having and keeping these wars going.
But let's
And
focus on Maduro. That could be it. That would be a real bummer, and especially
that
with
would suck.
Rubio in there. Yeah, Rubio's going to be frothing at the mouth for Maduro.
Yeah, that's the other thing. I mean, that sucks. Give me your take on the ceasefire. I am getting multiple. Trump never exactly says what he means, and I can't say never, but often he doesn't. Like, he's all over the place, and it gives people different perceptions of what he's doing at any particular moment, which is deeply not helpful.
Yeah.
Especially on this issue of the Middle East. Because when you listen to, what is it called? Wiskoff, I believe, the guy he sent to get the deal in Israel, he is saying something slightly different than Trump. Like, when he was on Fox News earlier today, when Trump was asked the other day, did he think the deal was going to last? Trump was like, oh man, that's not my war. Basically, I don't care. That's not my responsibility. And yet he was instrumental in pushing his envoy, to get the deal. And then when you talk to his envoy comes across as saying, well, yeah, we're going to attend to this. We want to be able to get to the second stage of this deal. And when you listen to some of the stuff Trump has said in the past, he was very critical of Netanyahu. I mean, he put up that video of Jeffrey Sachs.
Yeah.
And so there's this question, it comes across as if he does not have a great relationship with Netanyahu. He doesn't necessarily seem to like the guy. And I was showing this clip to my audience, and let me get your take on this. And Trump makes the point in this clip, well, Abbas wanted a deal, Netanyahu did not. And it was clear that Netanyahu did not, and he realized that within 3 minutes of talking to Netanyahu. And so my thought is, okay, regardless of how much money Donald Trump got in order to allow Israel to do whatever it wants, and you can see the people that he put into his positions that are completely obsequious to Israel, these people are, I would argue, monsters. And yet, I get the sense that this is also rattling around in his head. I want to get your take on this.
I think it's a terrible personal trait. I haven't spoken to him since, right? I didn't talk to him. I thought he wanted to make a deal more than Netanyahu. And I will be honest, I had a great meeting with him, Abbas, right? I had a great meeting with him. And we spent a lot of time together, talked about many things. And it was almost like a father. I mean, he was so nice. Couldn't have been nicer. And after meeting with Bibi for 3 minutes, I looked at him and said, you don't want to make a deal, do you? And he said, well, and the fact is, I don't think Bibi ever wanted to make a deal. Why? I thought the Palestinians were impossible, that the Israelis would do anything to make peace and a deal. I found that not to be true.
I am astonished by that clip. Because up to this point, my point of view of Trump was he is just purely a Zionist. He is obsequious to Israel. He's getting all of this money from Miriam Adelson to effectively do whatever Israel wants. And then he puts up the Jeffrey Sachs video. And then I know that that video existed like years ago. And so my thought was, okay, maybe he is a Zionist. Maybe he's just not ideological in the sense that people tend to be ideologically wet. Maybe he's organizing this thing of deals. And so in his mind, I want a deal. I want to get this war over with. I don't want my hands on this per se. And so I'm sending my guy over there to get this deal. And on some level, if possible, we'll try to stick to it. I mean, granted, you're dealing with Netanyahu in this situation, but try to stick to it because he doesn't necessarily want this larger war in the Middle East that somebody like Netanyahu wants. Meaning Trump knows that Netanyahu wants the U.S. to fight this kind of war with Iran. That is not necessarily something that he may want. In which case, he's putting out this kind of video of Jeffrey Sachs calling Netanyahu a deep, dark son of a bitch by Jeffrey Sachs. Give me your take on this. How do you frame this? Like, where do you see him in this? Because again, he's putting out two sides at once. This is very weird.
Yeah, I mean, you could make the argument, and I would certainly, buy it, that if he is a Zionist, if he is super pro-Israel, you could make the argument that what Netanyahu's doing is hurting Israel. I mean, you are a nation of 7 million people surrounded by many times more of that who hate your guts after what you've done to Gaza more than anything. And you've raised a whole new generation of people, what's left of them, who hate your guts. and can't wait for revenge. So if you actually want Israel to survive, you wouldn't like Netanyahu and what the people around him have done. So that's certainly a possibility. The other is, he put a lot of effort in Trump 1.0 into the Abrahamic Accords. I think he wants a deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and certainly Netanyahu. And Netanyahu is a moderate here. Let's be honest. But people way to the right of Netanyahu, this is the last thing they want. They want to basically kill everyone who's in their way. They want to take over every country that's their neighbor, and that's just it. Because God said, "I need to do it." Whatever, And I don't think Trump wants this deal. He wants peace in the Middle East because it'll be a great achievement. He wants to be there, like Jimmy Carter was in the Camp David Accords. Everyone's shaking hands. He looks great. That's fair enough. So I think there's probably several different reasons for this. But ironically, because I know his views on the Middle East, and they're very different than many of ours. I thought things would get worse, at least at this point. It looks more promising than under Sleepy Joe and Sleepy Blinken, just going, sort of sleepwalking through a slaughter.
Yeah, sleepwalking through a slaughter. Yeah. I mean, and what's wild about it too, Trump wasn't even president yet when he was able to get this deal. And so, yeah, I mean, like, it shows that Joe Biden applying even the mildest pressure could have gotten a deal. And that Netanyahu just fundamentally didn't respect Biden. Yeah, it's just wild to me. It's just super weird to me. Let me ask you this. Is there anything else in regards to his executive orders that jumped out at you as being, for example, his energy policy, national energy emergency, ordering expedited deregulation of drilling. Well, yeah, he was going to do that. Pulled out of the Paris Climate Treaty, executive orders targeting DEI transgender Americans. Basically, there's one man or two genders, one man, one woman. I actually agree with that. Yeah, is there anything else of this before I close that jumps out at you that you thought? Because I got to be honest, he sat there for hours. It seemed like hours just signing executive orders. Let's go into this notion of organization. For better or for worse, he came in with a plan. And, you would kind of want a president to come in with a plan. Like you said, it's a very short window of time that a president could get anything done. In Washington, D.C., before inertia kind of sets in and you got stuff pulling at you and pulling against you and everything else. From your take on this, what do you think would be his agenda? What do you think the main thrust of his agenda is going to be in that window of time? Or do you think there are going to be multiple items that he's going to try to get done all at once in order to set his agenda in motion in regards to what his administration is going to be about for these last 4 years?
Well, I think for better or for worse, it's going to be nationalism, and it'll be a mixed bag. I think the nationalism that led him to, for example, and you're saying which ones I think were particularly good. And I don't remember all of them, but getting out of the World Health Organization and getting out of this pandemic treaty, I think is fantastic for the country. I think he was burned really badly by people he had advising him during so-called COVID pandemic, and I think he's trying to make amends for that. He reinstated all the military guys and gals who were kicked out because they didn't want to take the shot. I think that's great. But getting us out of these globalist treaties where you have unelected bureaucrats who are very authoritarian minded, I think that's a great thing. I think it's in getting out of the climate treaty is a great thing because it's all a joke. There are much better ways of protecting the environment than having these weirdos out there telling you what to do. So I think for better or for worse, it's going to be nationalism.
What's wild about it? They're so adamant about the climate thing. And look, I'm a lefty, right? I'm perfectly fine with dealing with issues of the climate, but don't tell me about the climate and then blow up Nord Stream. You can't have it both ways, right? Like, it's outrageous that they've created this kind of massive climate emergency, like this massive event that is detrimental to the climate, while all of a sudden also preaching about the climate. His 5% NATO, where do you place that? Do you think there's an argument that Donald Trump is subversively trying to effectively destroy NATO, and that the way he's trying to do this is by all right, I need you guys now to pay 5%, something that he knows they're not going to do since they're not even paying the 2%. Is that his wedge into, I guess, unraveling or at the very least damaging this kind of military capacity? Or does he just kind of assume, well, I'm not going to get the 5%, but I might get 3%? Where do you frame this? So this could be the last question on this, because we're hitting the hour.
I mean, we all get our own little personal Trump doll, you know, and he can be what we want him to be. I like to think that he's tweaking the Europeans. They've destroyed their economy in pursuit of a Russia regime change that will never happen. And I think he's tweaking with that. The same with like Greenland. You know, we're going to take over Greenland. He's tweaking them. What are the Danes going to do about it? You've given all your weapons, you morons. You know, there's nothing you can do about it. So I do think there's some of that. There's no way in Hades that Germany is going to spend 5% on defense, on military. It's not going to happen. And a lot of other countries either. The Poles are dumb enough to do it. The Balts are dumb enough to do it. But the rest of them, you know, they're not going to do it. So I hope there's a little bit of an element of that. Let them stew in their own juices. And we're seeing the rebellion among peoples in Europe. They're doing everything they can to suppress people on the left and the right in Germany. Sarah Wagenknecht, a classic left-winger who's terrific, she's now far right. You know, I mean, everything is far right that I don't like. People are rising up, I think, you know, and I think it's a great thing.
Daniel McAdams, man, I always appreciate talking to you, Daniel. Daniel McAdams, Executive Director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. You can learn more about Daniel's work at the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity by going to ronpaulinstitute.org. Man, Daniel, thank you for this, man. Always appreciate your take.
Thanks, friend. Take care.
You too. Have a good one. All right. We have come to the end of the show. I want to hit my chats first. Look, guys, by the way, if you dig this content, hit the like button, share this content, share it far and wide, share it to your mama, your daddy, whoever else may be interested in listening to this voice in this great suit. Also, if you guys really dig this content, you can always support through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, super chats, stickers, or memberships. We have several members of the Thomas family. I think we have nearly up to 20 people at this point have joined the Thomas family, and they are deeply appreciated for being a part of this family. Also, I think I said super chats, Patreon, PayPal, all that good stuff. All of it supports the show, considering all of these shows are demonetized. At the very least, okay, I can't say all, most of the morning shows are demonetized, especially when we hit these issues of Israel, Palestine, war, people getting killed, etc. All of it helps, by the way. Even if you buy me a cup of coffee, all of it helps. Icy Sashin, I think this is Icy Sashin. Trump fights fire with fire. If he sends Navy and Marines into the region, wouldn't it make Putin panic? No. No. I mean, look, man, it's, as I pointed out before, if you're talking about him saying, I'm going to send troops into Greenland. Okay, well, Greenland can't do anything about it. Denmark can't do squat. The European military is non-existent for all intents and purposes. Yes, they have a military, but no, it's not any good. If you are saying that to Xi Jinping, you're out of your mind. This is a nuclear power. And it's one with a hell of a military. And same thing with Russia. You have a battle-hardened military that has been killing and dying for the last several years. The panic that you're going to get out of Putin is a different panic than what you get out of Europe. Europe's panic is, oh my God, how high does my ass need to be for him to kick it in this moment? Putin's issue is, oh my God, this fool is going to end the world. Those are two different concerns. One concern is just fear, because they don't have the capability to do anything about it. The other concern is they do have the capability of doing something about it, and there's the potential for an escalation that would end the world. Those are two very different concerns. So, no, those things are different. But I do appreciate your content. BGS Ibma. Okay. BGS IBMOR super sticker. Thank you, BGS. Deeply appreciate it. Ellie JJ, post the link in the chat. Jamal, repeat it. Finkel. Oh, wait, you posted the link in the chat. Excellent. Thank you for the audience to see it. Jabari, VOC Media. And Jabari, I haven't forgotten about you, by the way. I checked your email. I've just been a little bit busy. I will hit you today. I'm not trying to be not trying to be a dick. But of course, Mark is going to say it and be fine. He's white. Still a fan of Mark. Yeah, I mean, I think it's less about Mark being white and more about him being on the right of the political spectrum. But Either way, I mean, look, I would tell you this about Mark. He's rational. And what I mean by that is, regardless of your political distinction, if you're not like so ridiculously ideologically wed, then you can at the very least have a conversation with somebody. And like I said, there are going to be things you agree with and disagree with, but he is sane. He is rational. I've talked to him for years. And so, yeah, him being on a, let's say further to the right on the political spectrum, he's going to come away with a certain assessment. Agreed. 1,000% agreed. I am not bullish on Trump. I have deep concerns about Trump and this band of misfits that he's organized into this particular government. Some of these people I like. Love Tulsi in this government, love RFK Jr. in this government, and actually think they have a good influence. I don't even hate Ratcliffe all that much being in this government. The others, terrifying. Just monsters. So, take it with a grain of salt. I guess for me, I just kind of accepted bad things are going to happen and just steel yourself with the fact that bad things are going to happen. What I hang my hat on, at the very least, what I'm hoping to hang my hat on, is this hope. And yeah, it's hopium, fair enough. But this hope that he does have an inkling to try to end these wars. I mean, for fuck's sake, we're talking about like 1 million people being killed. And, this number of the Russians is nonsense. But if you're talking about like 600,000 dead Ukrainians, 200,000 dead Russians, that is appalling, especially in a war that never needed to take place. That's an outright catastrophe. And you get the Blinkens and the Bidens and the Kamala Harrises of the world who are like, now send your children. Since all of you have been killed, now send your kids. And so, I'm put in this kind of disposition of this. It's a catastrophe. It's an utter disaster. And it's a disaster that didn't need to take place. And let's be very clear here. You have a country that is in a war that is not in control of its own military in real terms. I mean, fact of the matter is, at the point where you get the U.S. saying, now go send your kids. Okay, well, that means you're not exactly part of this military. When Zelensky goes out and is willing to make a deal for the Istanbul agreements and agrees to the contours of the agreements, and you get the U.S. represented by Boris Johnson going in saying, you are not going to get security guarantees from us. Go fight and die. Go fight and die. Okay, well, that shows me that you don't have full control over your own apparatus. And if you don't indeed have control over your own apparatus, like, think of how insane that is. Because look, it's one thing if your country sends your people out to a war. Okay, that's you, your country, your leadership sending your people out to a war where there's a tether connected to what is taking place on the battlefield and what is the political consequences on the ground back home on what is taking place on the battlefield. If you are the German military and your military gets crushed in Stalingrad, okay, well, those are political consequences for that. Whether it's credibility loss or whether that's, more aggressive. Okay, but what happens if you are not the one who are pulling the strings for your military when it's out there dying and fighting? And what you get are scenes where you have propaganda assaults that get all of those people killed. You get situations where the U.S. is like, it's not Americans dying, so what does it matter? We get to send money. They get to put their troops out there. This is a win-win. Okay, well, that's not a win-win. They're losing 30% territory. Their people are getting slaughtered. And for us, send your kids. Because it's not us that are fighting and dying. And yet, we are the ones that are effectively directing that military to go out there and die. The feedback mechanism that typically takes place where military gets crushed and their political consequences for it is fundamentally broken. So yeah, it's a catastrophe. If Trump, at the very least, ends the war, I have very little wants. I have very little expectations. And maybe no expectations, just wants. But stopping people from dying is one. It's one. I had no expectations to either party. For Harris, I thought she was going to get us into a war because I thought she was incompetent. From the standpoint of Trump, I firmly believe he is incompetent. But if his instincts are as such of, I'm willing to make a deal if a deal is possible and on the table. That's further than the forever war that the Democratic Party just seems to fundamentally believe in. And most of the Republican Party, let's be honest, right? I'm sorry, that's a lot of wood to chop for the answer, Jabari. My bad. Ellie JJ, how can I become a member? It should be something at the bottom of the video. So if you go to any of my other clips, either videos or something else, there should be something at the bottom that says like member. Now, what I've realized that if you are using an iPad or Apple product, it's not there. I don't know why. My mom found it out the hard way. Now, if you're using a computer, if you're using an Android or something like that, it should be at the bottom of the video. Especially any random video should be there. Yeah. You're more than welcome to become a member, JJ. Welcome to the club. Welcome to the family. D. Marie, you have such a unique guess. It's really a testimony to your openness to be different per, what is this? I can't see it. Perspective. And I'd highly educated ongoing at your viewers. Thank you. Wait a minute. I think there's some typos in there, D. Marie, but that's okay. I still love you. It says you have a unique guess. It's really a testimony to your openness to be different different perspectives. And I'm highly educated ongoing at your viewers. Thank you, Jamal. Well, yeah, I mean, look, I don't need an echo chamber, if that makes sense. And, when we were on fault lines, we used to talk to everybody. I mean, left, right, everything in between. Communists, libertarians, everything in between. Hell, we even had people on there from NATO who we would have debates with. I don't have to agree with you, to hear your point of view. There may be some points of view that I think are utterly outlandish, in which case I would probably just say, okay, dude, this is nonsense. But usually the people who come on have a point of view, and whether I agree with them or not, at the very least, regard them in some way where I'm open to hearing that take. Like Mark is a libertarian, or as he said, recovering libertarian, but Mark is sane. Malik will come on. Malik is a Trump supporter. I am not a Trump supporter to any degree. I thought Trump should have been put in a cage after he tried to overthrow the government. But Malik and I still get along, and him and I can have conversations about stuff, even if we disagree. What's funny about it, I think, you know what it is? If I think the person is sane, I can talk to him. I think it's that. If the person is a flat earther, we're probably not going to have a good conversation. Like Lord Jamal, it's humiliating. That rapper is fucking lunatic. I'm sorry. It is an astonishing thing when you are talking to a scientist about physical phenomena that is like elementary. Like, we're not even talking about like advanced physics. We're not even talking about like quantum mechanics or like the expansion of the universe or just, the weirdness associated with the speed of light. We're not even getting into any of that. We're just talking about very basic elementary stuff, like the Earth being round and the reason that planets are round as opposed to a square or some other shape. And you get a rapper that comes to the assessment that the Earth is flat and will argue that the Earth is flat. And you're like, okay, dude, you're a fucking idiot. I wouldn't be able to have that conversation. I wouldn't have the patience to have the conversation. I wouldn't have the patience. There are all sorts of reasons. I mean, like, there's all sorts of evidence, like Antarctica exists, for example, or even this kind of basic premise that gravity pulls things at equidistance. That's the reason why it's a ball. That's the reason why it's a circle. It's not, a square. It's not a rectangle. It's because it needs to be equidistant. And so a circle or a sphere is the thing that allows it to be equidistant at every point. I'm sorry. I saw that thing with Lord Jamal and I was like, this guy, he's a lunatic, just outright lunatic. D. Marie, thank you for that. Honestly, I appreciate it. I definitely appreciate it. And I appreciate the compliment because I do try. Yeah, I do try. And look, my point of view has been informed by these people. Like, I'll give an example. When Farron was on the show and when Manila was on the show, And when the issue of like transgender sports and those type of things came up, and their take on it was so honest that I ended up agreeing with them. I was like, you guys are right. And the other thing was, dude, they're taking women's spaces. Like, you're edging women out of these various spaces. So, they have women's sports because they wanted women to participate in sports. And they didn't believe that women were going to be able to participate with men in sports. So if you have a football game, or let's say a basketball game, that guy's dunking on all of these women because he's 6'8". Okay, well, this seems unfair. Or you have a track meet, and you're like, okay, this seems unfair. This guy is beating the hell out of us. Or you have the swim meet, this seems unfair. And so we need to separate these sports. And then you get a situation where you get like this thing of, well, I'm a woman. Yes, I have a penis. And yes, I have a full beard. But I identify as a woman. And so I should be able to, go swimming. Or I should be able to get into women's weightlifting. And I should be able to get into women's basketball. It's like, you're edging me out of my own, you're edging me out of my space. And their point was, this is unfair. And I mean, they were further into it, but I was like, you're right. You're absolutely right. Like, my point of view is informed by some of these groups. It's the way you realize that the left is gone fucking insane. It's just bizarre. And the last one, Ellie JJ. When Frost sends you the link, oh, I see. When Frost sends you the link related to Finkel and BlackRock, post it in the comments. I will. In fact, he probably was going to send it to me in a few. Once I cut the videos up. Well, I'll do it twice. I'll put it in this video in the comments, and I'll put it under Frost in his video when I slice this video up. Guys, we have come to the end. We've come to the end. I had such a full show today because I wanted to make up for the fact that yesterday was truncated. And so, full beard. Yes. Yes, full beard. Sometimes. Sometimes. Look, full beard, I'm being hyperbolic. I'm being hyperbolic when I'm putting that, but I'm trying to make a point. I'm being hyperbolic, but I'm trying to make a point. But even if the guy had a full beard, they can still identify. What stops you from identifying as a woman with a full beard? Nothing. Nothing at all. All right. And by the way, when we're having this conversation, I'm like, I am one of their biggest advocates. Because for me, I want you to be able to live your life in the way you want to live your life. If you want me to call you she, God bless. I have no issue with it. If you want, I want you to live a balls out life in the capacity and the way that you want to live that life in absolute freedom, liberty, justice, all that stuff. You have my absolute 100% backing on that. But blind people can't drive. Right? Like, I also want that for blind people, but they're like, we're stuck with corners. All right, I don't want to get too far into it. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I'm going to say subscribe. I want to thank all of you for joining me, and I will see you guys bright and early. What's the date? Thursday, tomorrow morning. Have a good one all.